0 Hour and Other Documentary Poems. Also by E Cardenal. Contents. Preface, by Donald D. Walsh. The Redemption of Reality Through Documentary Poetry, by Robert Pringmill. Notes on the editor and translators. 0 Hour I. Nicaraguan Canto 16. Mosquito Kingdom 37. Oracle over Managua 43. Trip to New York 69. Epistle to Monsignor Quesaldalega 84. Epistle to Jose Coronel Urtco 91. Lights 98. Preface. E Cardenal is a Catholic priest and a Marxist poet, and he sees no conflict between these two loyalties. Born in 1925 in Granada, Nicaragua, he studied at the University of Mexico, 1943-47, and Columbia University, 1947-49, where he was deeply influenced by the poetry of Ezra Pound. From 1957 to 1959 he was a novice at the Trappist monastery at Gethsemane, Kentucky, where his spiritual director was Thomas Merton. They came to know and to translate each other's poetry. The rigors of the Trappist training were too great for Cardenal's fragile health, but he did spend the years 1959 to 1965 studying for the priesthood, and he was ordained in 1965. At the urging of Merton, he returned to Nicaragua and established a church and commune which he named Nuestra Señora de Solentiname. Solentiname is an archipelago of 38 islands on Lake Nicaragua, with a population of 1,000 campesinos and fishermen. Sunday services at Solentiname focused on readings from the Gospels and on the vocal, at times very vocal, reactions of the congregation to the readings. These are now appearing in translation. In 1970 Cardenal was invited to Cuba to be a judge in a poetry contest conducted by the Casa de las Americas. He stayed 3 months and wrote a book on his generally enthusiastic reactions to Castro's Cuba. In 1977 appeared Apocalypse and Other Poems, a collection of Cardenal's short poetry from the 1940s to 1973, including, among others, epigrams, Prayer for Marilyn Monroe, coplas on the death of Merton, recordings of the Sacred Pipe, condensations, and the title poem. In October 1977, the Nicaraguan government, then under the Somoza dictatorship, exasperated beyond endurance by the intensification of revolutionist activity in Solentiname, ordered the destruction of the commune. Forced into exile, Cardenal became a roving ambassador for the FSLN, Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, the guerrilla group that in 1979 toppled Somoza. Cardenal was named Minister of Culture in the new government. Although the poems in the present volume were written between 1954 and 1979, they are as timely and as timeless as dictatorship and police brutality on any continent and in any country. In addition, they are heartbreaking and heartwarming poetry. Madison, Connecticut, DDW. The Redemption of Reality. Through Documentary Poetry. James Monaco's How to Read a Film is surprisingly helpful when reading the documentary poetry of E Cardenal, the well-known Nicaraguan poet-priest. What Monaco has to say about the foremost theorist of film realism Siegfried Kracauer fits Cardenal precisely, if one just reads poetry for film throughout. In Kracauer's case, film serves a purpose. It does not exist simply for itself, as a pure aesthetic object, it exists in the context of the world around it. Since it stems from reality, it must also return to it, hence the subtitle of Kracauer's theory of film, The Redemption of Physical Reality. If this sounds vaguely religious, the connotation is, I think, intended. For Kracauer, film has a human, ethical nature. Ethics must replace aesthetics, thereby fulfilling Lenin's prophecy. That ethics are the aesthetics of the future. We need the redemption which film offers, we need to be brought back into communication with the physical world. Film can mediate reality for us. It can both corroborate and debunk our impressions of reality. 1. All Cardenal's poetry debunks, corroborates, and mediates reality. His aesthetic principles are clearly ethical, and most of his poems are more than just vaguely religious. But the filmic parallel fits the documentary poems of the present collection particularly well, though I am not trying to suggest that Cardenal has ever gone to the films in a conscious search for fresh techniques. The poetry of his first New Directions collection, Apocalypse and Other Poems, 1977, used a wide variety of styles and ranged in length from lapidary epigrams to extended evocations of primitive Amerindian cultures, often with much use of Poundian collage techniques and vivid imagery. But all 8 texts of 0 Hour and Other documentary poems set out to document reality, and so redeem it, in a more dialectically visual way, picturing things, peoples, and events in the light of a clear-cut socio-political commitment, selecting, shaping, and imposing interpretative patterns on the world, with liberal use of such filmic editing techniques as cross-cutting, accelerated montage, or flash frames, and pursuing the redemption of physical reality by bringing us back into communication with its harshness and its beauty. Poets and cameras can both affect what they record, but whereas a documentary camera's presence conditions the ongoing situation, Cardenal's recording of the present or the past is aimed at helping to shape the future, involving the reader in the poetic process in order to provoke him into full political commitment, thus fostering the translation of the poet's more prophetic visions into socio-political fact. The label documentary poems is mine, not his, but Cardenal seemed pleased with it when I coined it in 1972 in order to highlight the features which distinguished 0 Hour, composed in 1954-56, and Nicaraguan Canto, 1970-72, from the kinds of poetry on which Apocalypse was to draw. It suits Mosquito Kingdom, 1972, Oracle over Managua, 1972-73, and Trip to New York, 1973, and also fits the 2 epistles, one sent to Monsignor Quesaldaliga in 1974, and one to José Coronel Urtco in 1975, although their titles underline the fusion of an earlier biblical mode with his more recent documentary approach. Those 7 poems are fairly long. Even the shortest, Mosquito Kingdom, runs to almost 200 lines, while Oracle over Managua is just short of 1,000. The 8th poem, Lights, 1979, is also a documentary, but a far shorter one, brought in by way of epilogue because it describes Cardenal's return to Nicaragua from exile, after the fall of Somoza in July 1979. None of the longer poems is simple, though they all aim at surface clarity, being meant for a wide public. They are strictly factual, but facts can be double-edged, and their juxtapositions can also set up further meanings. Cardenal's reader cannot just sit back and listen to the words and rhythm, he has to visualize sequences of disparate images, each one a snatched glimpse of reality, noting their pairings and progressions, matching them both with each other and with what is left unsaid, and thereby sharing in the extraction of their fuller meaning. These poems demand more than just an alert response, because the poet wishes to prod us beyond thought and into action. His texts are never just concerned to document and understand reality, but also to help change it, which is why they have been called the poetry of useful prophecy. But the data have to be recorded before reality can be reshaped, and the reshaping lies beyond the poems themselves. The changes for which the poet yearns lie in the future. To be precise, those changes all lay in the future when these poems were written, but many of his prophecies are now being translated into fact by the Nicaraguan Revolution. Their poet, who wrote 0 Hour back in the 1950s against the first Somoza to tyrannize Nicaragua, and who was to become 2 decades later the spokesman of the liberation movement which brought the last Somoza down, returned from exile as Minister of Culture in the Nicaraguan government of Reconstruction, and the cultural values which he now promotes are clearly stated in the later poems of this collection. Neither those values nor the realities which his poetry tries to redeem are of purely local relevance, yet the poetry must be viewed in its original context for its wider implications to emerge. When Apocalypse appeared in 1977, Cardenal was living quietly in Nuestra Señora de Solentiname, a religious commune on a remote tropical island in the Great Lake of Nicaragua. After revolutionary activism in the 1950s reflected in the last part of Zero Hour, he had renounced violence, under Merton's influence. Having tried his vocation at the Trappist Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky, where Merton was the novice master, he completed his training as a Roman Catholic priest in Mexico and Colombia. Ordained in August 1965, at the age of 30, he founded the Solentiname commune with two friends in 1966. There, he continued to preach Mertonian nonviolence for many years, while studies of the high pre-Columbian cultures and the beliefs and rituals of primitive Amerindian tribes, both vividly reflected in the poems of homage to the American Indians III, had deepened his respect for the peaceful spiritual values he discerned in the pre-military society of the classic Mayan cities, as well as in the classless systems of those tribes. Their values largely coincided with those of the early church, and he recreated them in his own commune, most of whose later members were Nicaraguan campesinos. For 11 years, it remained a tranquil haven in a violent land. Nicaragua had been ruled by the Somoza family since the mid-1930s, and though the first dictator Anastasio Taco Somoza was killed in 1956 by a lone patriot, control remained in the hands of the Somozas or their nominees. By 1977, Tacho's second son Takaido had been directly or indirectly in power for a whole decade. Supported by the United States as a bulwark against communism, as well as by American big business, Takaido had a powerful lobby on his side in Washington. Nicaragua's third Somoza headed one of the most oppressive regimes in Latin America. Meanwhile, and chiefly inspired by the Cuban Revolution, a guerrilla movement known as the FSLN, the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, or Sandinista National Liberation Front, came into being in the early 1960s, taking its name from the guerrillero General Augusto Cesar Sandino, who had been murdered in 1934 on the orders of the first Somoza. Sandino is the hero of the second episode of Zero Flower, and the many parallels between the guerrilla warfare of the FSLN and Sandino's earlier war against the American Marines underpin the structure of Nicaraguan Canto, which Cardenal dedicated to the FSLN when it was first published underground in July 1972, but he was still preaching a peaceful social revolution when I went to spend that summer with him in Solentiname, though the pressures toward violence were already mounting. Most of the Catholic hierarchy still sided with the interests of the ruling class throughout Latin America, but the theology of liberation had been gaining ground among the younger priests. Some of them, such as the Colombian University chaplain Camilo Torres, had even given up their ministry to join guerrilla groups. We talked a lot about Camilo Torres, whose decision Cardenal openly admired, although he said that he himself could never take up arms, and it was clear that he had already moved well to the left of the majority of progressive Roman Catholic theologians of liberation. He had been deeply influenced by 3 months spent in Cuba in 1970, which persuaded him that many reforms he had deemed unattainable could be achieved in practice, though not without an equally radical restructuring of the social order. The prose work in Cuba, his first volume published by New Directions, in 1974, describes that visit vividly. Part of its attraction lies in the naive directness of its reporting, and it comments with appealing frankness on certain obvious Cuban faults, but what captured his imagination was the basic concept of Cuba's new society, with its puritanical morality, in striking contrast to the decadent aspects of Western society which he had so often attacked, and an egalitarian work ethic which appeared to offer a viable alternative to capitalist private enterprise. At his request, I checked the first printed copy of the Spanish text, En Cuba, 1972, for errata, and there were many, since no Buenos Aires printing could be adequately supervised from distant Solentiname. We also talked a lot about his Cuban experience, and I summed up his attitude as follows in my introduction to Apocalypse. While noting that the system had its faults, the only thing it seemed to him to lack to be a viable replacement for capitalist society was a sound Christian basis. If its drastic changes in the social order in the here and now of life on earth could be grounded in theological principles which looked beyond this world to a timeless reality, then lasting social justice would be achieved. The new people that is going to be born would be a people made up of the new men whom Che Guevara predicated, but the values of their communism would coincide with those of the earliest Christians. It is important for our understanding of his changing attitudes that both that text and an earlier study, where the same point was made at greater length, were submitted to Cardenal in 1975 and 1977 and met with no dissent. Yet when I spent long hours with him in Costa Rica in July 1979, just before the final triumph of the Sandinistas, he said that I had been mistaken in thinking that he had ever felt the Cuban system lacked a Christian grounding, because he had always thought it was a truly Christian society already. Having myself just come from Cuba, and having seen how the practice of Christianity normally proved a barrier to all advancement, I must confess that I found this view of Cuba as an ideal Christian state disquietingly naive. But this was certainly how he saw Cuba during our talks in July 1979. What he said made me realize that many a statement in the later documentary poems which I had taken to be either evangelical exaggeration or poetic license was meant to be taken strictly at face value. Even in 1972, it was clear that he had already begun to modify the Mertonian ideal of strict nonviolence, albeit with great reluctance, having come to recognize that existing structures were unlikely to be changed by peaceful means, but by July 1979 he had moved so far from his Mertonian stance that he could champion violence as the sword of divine justice, and even preach the virtues of a holy war. I suppose that the first signs of this great shift in attitude had been there for me to read in 1972, had I had eyes to see or ears to hear. The spiritual life of Solentiname already revolved round a kind of collective discussion of scriptural texts which later produced the printed dialogues of the Gospel in Solentiname, for and many of the texts were glossed in a highly revolutionary way. The revolutionary form of Roman Catholicism which these discussions embody is likely to flourish in much of Latin America, however much the Vatican may try to prevent any further radicalization of the Catholic Church in the Third World. Its ideas are relevant to all except the earliest of these 8 documentary poems. 0 Hour, a Latin American revolutionary classic for over 20 years, was written during his first militant phase before his religious conversion, whereas all the others are subsequent to his experience of Cuba, which he has frequently described as being almost a second conversion. Today, the period of 14 nonviolent years between those two conversions seems no more than a pacific interlude in a predominantly militant career. Yet how exactly was it that the mounting pressure of events in Nicaragua came to shatter the peace of the commune he had founded under Merton's guidance, leading him into exile and the gospel of a holy war? First came a major natural disaster, the earthquake which destroyed the center of Managua on December 23, 1972, killing perhaps as many as 15,000 people. It produced a surge of international aid, but as much as 50% of this found its way into the pockets of Somoza, his relatives and business cronies, and the officers of his National Guard Taquido, having failed to appreciate the extent to which the cynical flagrancy of such post-quake corruption would foster discontent at every level of his people. Cardenal's Oracle over Managua is a meditation on the aftermath of the catastrophe, while Trip to New York records a 6-day journey which he made in June 1973, to help raise funds for the survivors. Mounting criticism of the regime strengthened the position of the FSLN, and its increased activities in the northern hills led to mass killings of campesinos by the National Guard, in an attempt to cut off its supplies. Cardenal's first epistle was composed against this background, when he was asked to preface a collection of poems called Tiene Nuestra, Libertad by Mgr. Pedro Maria Casaldeliga, Bishop of São Felix, in the Brazilian Mato Grosso, a sorrowful poem, full of indignation at the immensity of human anguish in their respective countries, yet heartened by the poet's sense of Christian solidarity, for there where the helicopters gather is the body of Christ. His second epistle was an open letter to an old friend and mentor, the Nicaraguan poet José Coronel Urtco, written as the quality of life in Nicaragua grew steadily worse, and published in Spain, in 1976, in a volume of Cardenal's writings whose title means The Sanctity of Revolution. 5 Soon afterward words became deeds, When the FSLN made its first unsuccessful attempt to bring about a popular uprising, in October 1977. Its failure meant the end of the Solentiname Commune. By then, the small community had become virtually an FSLN cell, and most of its younger members joined in a fairly successful attack on the National Guard garrison at San Carlos, an inland port at the head of the Rio San Juan, in the southeastern corner of Lake Nicaragua. When an airstrike heralded the arrival of reinforcements, they were obliged to withdraw across the jungle border into Costa Rica. Cardenal had left some days before, to represent the FSLN abroad. Reprisals for the San Carlos raid were brutal, including the detention and removal of most of the remaining islanders, many of whom just disappeared in custody, and the destruction of every building at Nuestra Señora de Solentiname except the church, which was used as a temporary barracks. Outlawed by Somoza, Cardenal published an open letter about the assault on San Carlos and the consequent destruction of his community, soon followed by a separate statement proudly proclaiming himself an active member of the Sandinistas. His open letter to the people of Nicaragua said that collective meditation on the social relevance of Scripture had played the leading part in the radicalization of his commune, ultimately inspiring its members to join in the armed struggle for one reason alone, out of their love for the kingdom of God. Out of their ardent desire to establish a just society, a true and concrete kingdom of God here on this earth. After 1977, events moved increasingly swiftly in Nicaragua. The murder of Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, the chief opposition leader, and editor of La Prensa, led to a general strike, in January 1978. An uprising in Masaya near the capital was savagely put down in early March, with the destruction of the Indian quarter of Monumbo and the massacre of several hundred of its inhabitants. Toward the end of August, the FSLN led a more general uprising in 15 towns, but the National Guard succeeded in re-establishing a precarious control over most of the country after several weeks, at the cost of between 6,000 and 10,000 lives, chiefly civilians, killed in massive airstrikes as well as in the reprisals which followed the recapture of each rebellious town. After withdrawing into the hills in order to regroup, the FSLN consolidated its three politically somewhat diverse sections into a single fighting force, which launched a third and decisive offensive in May 1979, just after the beginning of the rainy season. Faced by its military success, the United States abandoned Somoza just 7 weeks later, and he fled the country on July 17. That morning, I was wakened in my hotel room in San Jose by a very early call from Cardenal, asking whether I had heard the news. "Se few he's gone Somoza, yeah se few." But those final weeks of fighting had claimed perhaps another 30,000 Nicaraguan lives and left close to 250,000 people homeless, about a seventh of the country's total population. Only a day after Somoza's resignation, the new government was flown into Nicaragua by night, under conditions of great secrecy vividly described by Cardenal in Lights, the first poem he had written since leaving Solentiname just over 19 months before, and the last one in this collection. Whether Cardenal will be able to write much poetry while Minister of Culture seems doubtful, particularly since his accustomed method of composition involves long periods of meditation, drafting, redrafting, cutting up, and reassembling numerous versions, on the way toward the final process of montage, often working on several poems in parallel, with the composition of the longer ones sometimes lasting over several years. He told me in San Jose, just after his appointment to his ministerial post, that he could see no way to get back to this kind of work till he could withdraw from public politics, adding that he could not write poetry in any other way. He hoped to be able to refound Nuestra Señora de Solentiname, but on a far wider base, as a center sponsoring the development of popular culture throughout the campesinos of Nicaragua. Meanwhile, there is the literacy campaign to be promoted and seen through. It is being coordinated by Ernesto's brother Fernando, a Jesuit. All his ideals for the raising of consciousness which this campaign will foster will be found, clearly voiced, at different points in these 8 documentary poems. Out of the 8, the one which offers a United States reader the easiest point of entry is probably the 5th, The 1973 trip to New York, its environment is familiar, the attitudes it documents, and many of the people named, will be familiar to readers of New Directions books, and this account of a rushed 6-day trip is the closest thing in any of the longer poems to the direct reporting of immediate experience, as in a personal diary. It ought to be read, however, as a deliberately public diary, and also strictly as poetry. Its appearance of uncommitted objectivity is a studied one, achieving its effects, as almost always in his better poems, obliquely, by poetic means, although its images are real, not metaphorical. They may seem as clear and as immediately revealed as snapshots taken with a Polaroid camera, photos which materialize before one's very eyes, often still in the presence of the objects photographed, in real life, against which one is able to control the degree of likeness which the camera has captured. But readers cannot match these shots against what they depict, and they have all been carefully selected and assembled, just as one ought, indeed, to edit one's vacation slides before inflicting them on friends. The process is less intellectual than intuitive. When pressed to say how he selects which details of reality to represent, Cardenal can never rationalize his procedure, saying no more than that he knows which details will turn out to be poetic in a given context. The shots he uses are, naturally, angled, so are cameras taken from the poet's individual viewpoint, which always has inherent ethical and moral preoccupations. They have been chosen and grouped, however intuitively, with a sure sense for thematic links and quiet ironies, some of which the poet makes explicit, but not all. Thus it would be rather naive to take Trip to New York as no more than a simple diary, or a piece of instant reportage couched in free verse. Readers would do well to examine Cardenal's methods in the familiar context of that known environment before they move into the half-alien Latin American world of the remaining poems, the first of which, 0 Hour, Hora or La Hora Cero, is certainly the best known of all his longer poems. As it is also the one which displays many of his favorite techniques in their most graspable form, it merits examination at somewhat greater length by way of introduction to the much later series of post-Cuban documentary poems. 0 Hour is in 4 parts, a brief opening section, in the nature of an introit, establishing the mood of Central American life under dictatorships, followed by 3 separate episodes. The first one concerns the economic factors underlying the politics of banana republics, the second is about Sandino, culminating in his treacherous execution, along with his brother Socrates and 2 of his own commanders, on Tacho's orders, within 3 weeks of peace having been signed, while the third concerns the Conspiration de Abril, an anti-Somozan plot which misfired, in April 1954, in which Cardenal himself took part. The first episode, largely based on data taken from a book called El Imperio del Banano, was written in 1954. The overlapping composition of the other 2 came later, the second being based on various documentary sources, while the third grew out of Cardenal's own notes made soon after the event, but reworked into poetry over a period of about 2 years. The introit was actually the last part to be written, not being composed till after Cardenal's religious conversion in 1956, and it ends with his earliest use of a biblical quotation in the actual body of a poem. Watchman. What hour is it of the night? Watchman. What hour is it of the night? Taken from Isaiah, 21:11. The unstated but implied "How long, O Lord, how long," is typical of his oblique approach. So, too, is the stylistic equivalent of a throwaway remark in lines like, "Often while smoking a cigarette I've decided that a man should die, says Yubico smoking a cigarette," in which the symbolic juxtaposition of speech with a visual detail which would be quite innocent without the speech creates a chilling filmic image. The whole introit depends on swiftly effective contrasts, whose meaning is not spoiled by being spelled out, the Guatemalan dictator with a head cold, while his people are dispersed with phosphorus bombs, a single window of the Honduran dictator's office smashed, provoking an inappropriately violent response from armed police. Such introductory shots build up the setting and its atmosphere in the same terms and ways as does the opening sequence of almost any film. Other techniques which will recur appear in the 3 episodes. Thus the collage of documentary sources in the economic sequence, with its oppressive and depersonalizing lists of company names and alienating juxtapositions of contrastive factual details, will become a characteristically Cardinalian technique, one learned from Pound, and which has influenced many younger Spanish-American poets through its use by Cardenal. Equally characteristic are the shafts of irony, often dependent on the reversal of an expected phrase like Carrias is the dictator / who didn't build the greatest number of miles of railroad, in Honduras. The Sandino episode brings in many favorite themes: heroic self-abnegation, the purity of motives, and the egalitarian virtues of a guerrilla force more like a community than like an army / and more united by love than by military discipline, features he will all use much later as heroic precedents, when depicting the Sandinista guerrilleros of the following generation. At one stage, he punctuates the action with repeated snatches of Adelita, perhaps the favorite song of the 1910 Mexican Revolution, intensifying the vision of Sandino's forces as a happy army since a love song was its battle hymn. This is a typically filmic use of song. Filmic, too, is the accelerated montage of the death sequence, with its visual and oral cross-cutting between parallel actions, the exchanges between Somoza and the American minister, and later between the American minister and Moncada, punctuated by the digging of a grave, a glimpse of prisoners, and the halting of Sandino's car, whose unnamed passengers are hustled off to face the firing squad. Similar devices are used in the 3rd episode. Cardinal's own entry on the scene intensifies the mood: I was with them in the April Rebellion / and I learned how to handle a rising machine gun. Its effect is characteristically heightened by the lack of further elaboration, as the I was there device gives way to the stark understatement of the hunting down and slaughter of Adolfo Baez Bone, whose identification with the land in which his body lies ensures his resurrection in the collective body of his people, a theme which becomes a leitmotif in later poems. The lyrical use of landscape and the seasons to echo or contrast with man's affairs, a striking feature of both the 2nd and the 3rd episodes, is a device which will achieve even greater prominence in Nicaraguan canto, the oracle, and both epistles. An understanding of how 0 Hour establishes its points helps greatly with later poems, where the chronological sequence of events is deliberately dislocated by abrupt, but often unspecified, temporal intercutting, while the poetic texture is complicated by far greater use of understated or oblique symbolic images or brief references whose wider connotations only emerge with hindsight, like the thrush which sings / in freedom, in the north, in the first few lines of Nicaraguan canto. Unstated echo of Sandino, later to be revealed as the first hint of the presence of contemporary Sandinista freedom fighters in the same northern hills. Nicaraguan canto, whose Spanish title Canto Nacional is as much an Araudian as a Poundian echo, culminates in one of Cardinal's most startling tours de force. Its last 9 lines consist entirely of birdsong, not a device which any translator could hope to reproduce with much success. After the canto, Mosquito Kingdom, Remo Mosco, provides easier reading, starting with the factual parody of Western pomp at the drunken coronation of a black British-sponsored puppet king as nominal ruler of the scattered 19th-century British settlements along the Mosquito Coast, all the way from Belize to Costa Rica, peopled by English-speaking former slaves from the West Indies, the Mosquito Indians themselves, and the mixed race born of their intermarriage. The poem jumps forward in time to the pompous ostentation of Cornelius Vanderbilt's huge private yacht North Star and Vanderbilt's involvement in the attempted exploitation of that Caribbean coast, and then cuts to a series of sordid and ill-fated dealings among its actual or would-be exploiters. Although the obscurity of this facet of 19th-century Nicaraguan local history may puzzle foreign readers, there is no missing the point of Cardinal's satirical devices. Oracle over Managua, Orawosar Managua, is a more somber and a far more complex poem. The earthquake which destroyed the city in 1972 is merely the latest stage of a long geological process, and the poem harks back to the long-past eruption which recorded the feat of fleeing prehistoric men and beasts in a layer of volcanic mud which later turned to stone, out at Acahualinxa, the site of one of the worst of the shanty towns which fringe Managua, to which the tourists and the seminarians used to go, their eyes averted from the slums, to view the footprints. One of these seminarians, the poet Leonel Rugema, became a Sandinista, and in the sections of the poem which are addressed to him Cardenal expresses their shared view of revolution as the natural next stage of evolution, a process started in the stars, millions of years ago, and which will require social metamorphoses as startling as those from caterpillar into chrysalis or chrysalis to butterfly. Rugema was cornered in a house in Managua by the National Guard on January 15, 1970, along with 2 other young urban guerrillas, and the siege of the house where they holed up was watched by thousands of Managuans as helicopters, planes, and even tanks were brought in to eliminate them. This small but epic incident in the Sandinista saga is made to interact, at numerous levels and in various complex ways, with the far greater catastrophe of the earthquake, in a highly intricate poetic structure. After Oracle over Managua, the trip to New York, Viaje Nueva York, seems easy, and neither epistle poses such problems of interpretation as the earlier poems because Cardenal's attitudes are stated more explicitly, for patently didactic purposes, while Lights, Luces, is equally accessible. The visual and associative material used to frame the ideas in these 4 poems is, however, handled with Cardenal's accustomed skill, shifts of focus or of angle, cuts from close-up or detail shots right through to extreme long, jump cuts for the sake of concision and abruptness, the poetic equivalent of pans and zooms, deft insert shots, to give additional data, the use of flashbacks, and flash-forwards, or of bridging shots, like those of railway wheels or newspapers in films. Foreshortening and forelengthening, applied both to space and to time, where films would use the time-lapse camera or slow motion, studied relational editing, match cuts which link 2 disparate scenes by the repetition of an action or a shape, or a sound, but most of all the dialectical process of collisional montage, which generates fresh meaning out of the meanings of adjacent shots. Cardenal's highly visual poetry displays the verbal equivalent of each of those effects, and many of his most vivid sequences could almost serve as detailed shooting scripts. All these devices, together with Poundian textual collage and the full range of more traditional poetic or rhetorical effects, are used in the course of Cardenal's documentary Redemption of Reality, which successively corroborates, debunks, or mediates things, people, and events in a validation process designed to govern what we are to consider true and real and meritorious, or false, illusory, contemptible, when viewed from the standpoint of his brave new revolutionary world. He obliges us to interact with the physical and social world, sheds moral light on it, involves us inescapably in its affairs, and then requires us to judge what he displays, clearly expecting us to share his verdicts, be they stated or implied, and hoping we may follow his revolutionary example. In the Latin American context, which is where his documentary poems are most obviously relevant, many people are doing just that, and the ideas which he communicates, whether obliquely or directly, are clearly around to stay and must be reckoned with. They've told me I talk only about politics now. It's not about politics but about revolution, which for me is the same thing as the kingdom of God. Epistle to José Coronel Urtco. St. Catherine's College, Oxford. Robert Pring Mill. 0 hour. Tropical nights in Central America, with moonlit lagoons and volcanoes and lights from presidential palaces, barracks, and sad curfew warnings. Often while smoking a cigarette I've decided that a man should die, says Yubico smoking a cigarette. In his pink wedding cake palace Yubico has a head cold. Outside, the people were dispersed with phosphorus bombs. San Salvador laden with night and espionage, with whispers in homes and boarding houses and screams in police stations. Carfa's palace stoned by the people. A window of his office has been smashed, and the police have fired upon the people. And Managua the target of machine guns from the chocolate cookie palace and steel helmets patrolling the streets. Watchman. What hour is it of the night? Watchman. What hour is it of the night? The campesinos of Honduras used to carry their money in their hats when the campesinos sowed their seed and the Hondurans were masters of their land. when there was money and there were no foreign loans or taxes for J.P. Morgan & Co., and the fruit company wasn't competing with the little dirt farmer. But the United Fruit Company arrived with its subsidiaries, the Tila Railroad Company and the Trujillo Railroad Company, allied with the Cuyamal Fruit Company. And Vaccaro Brothers and Company, later Standard Fruit and Steamship Company of the Standard Fruit and Steamship Corporation, the United Fruit Company with its revolutions for the acquisition of concessions and exemptions of millions in import duties and export duties, revisions of old concessions and grants for new exploitations, violations of contracts, violations of the Constitution. And all the conditions are dictated by the company, with liabilities in case of confiscation, liabilities of the nation, not of the company, and the conditions imposed by the latter, the company, for the return of the plantations to the nation, given free by the nation to the company, at the end of 99 years. And all the other plantations belonging to any other person or companies or enterprises which may be dependents of the contractors and in which this latter has or may have in the future any interest of any kind, will be as a consequence included in the previous terms and conditions. Because the company also corrupted pros. The condition was that the company build the railroad, but the company wasn't building it, because in Honduras mules were cheaper than the railroad, and a congressman was cheaper than a mule, as Zamuri used to say, even though he continued to enjoy tax exemptions and a grant of 175,000 acres for the company, with the obligation to pay the nation for each mile that he didn't build, but he didn't pay anything to the nation even though he didn't build a single mile. Carrias is the dictator who didn't build the greatest number of miles of railroad, and after all, that shitty railroad was of no use at all to the nation because it was a railroad between two plantations and not between the cities of Trujillo and Tegucigalpa. They corrupt the pros and they corrupt the Congress. The banana is left to rot on the plantations, or to rot in the cars along the railroad tracks, or it's cut overripe so it can be rejected. When it reaches the wharf or be thrown into the sea, the bunches of bananas declared bruised, or too skinny, or withered, or green, or overripe, or diseased, so there'll be no cheap bananas, or so as to buy bananas cheap. Until there's hunger along the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua. And the farmers are put in jail for not selling at 30 cents and their bananas are slashed with bayonets and the Mexican trader steamship sinks their barges on them and the strikers are cowed with bullets. And the Nicaraguan congressmen are invited to a garden party. But the black worker has 7 children. And what can you do? 5 you've got to eat, and you've got to accept what they offer to pay. 24 cents a bunch. While the tropical radio subsidiary W. as cabling Boston. We assume that Boston will give its approval to the payment made to the Nicaraguan congressman of the majority party because of the incalculable benefits that it represents for the company. And from Boston to Galveston by telegraph, and from Galveston by cable and telegraph to Mexico, and from Mexico by cable to San Juan del Sur, and from San Juan del Sur by telegraph to Porto Limon, and from Porto Limon by canoe way into the mountains arrives the order of the United Fruit Company. United is buying no more bananas. And workers are laid off in Porto Limon. And the little workshops close. Nobody can pay his debts. And the bananas rotting in the railroad cars. So there'll be no cheap bananas. And so that there'll be bananas cheap, 19 cents a bunch. The workers get EIS instead of wages. Instead of payment, debts. And the plantations are abandoned, for they're useless now, and given to colonies of unemployed. And the United Fruit Company in Costa Rica with its subsidiaries the Costa Rica Banana Company and the Northern Railway Company and the International Radio Telegraph Company and the Costa Rica Supply Company are fighting in court against an orphan. The cost of a derailment is $25 in damages, but it would have cost more to repair the track. And congressmen, cheaper than mules, Zamuri used to say. Sam Zamuri, the Turkish banana peddler in Mobile, Alabama, who one day took a trip to New Orleans and on the wharves saw United throwing bananas into the sea and he offered to buy all the fruit to make vinegar. He bought it, and he sold it right there in New Orleans, and United had to give him land in Honduras to get him to break his contract in New Orleans, and that's how Samsamuri appointed presidents in Honduras. He provoked border disputes between Guatemala and Honduras, which meant between the United Fruit Company and his company, proclaiming that Honduras, his company, must not lose 1 inch of land not only in the disputed strip but also in any other zone of Honduras, of his company, not in dispute. While United was defending the rights of Honduras in its lawsuit with Nicaragua Lumber Company, until the suit ended because he merged with United and afterward he sold all his shares to United, and with the proceeds of the sale he bought shares in United, and with the shares he captured the presidency of Boston, together with its employees the various presidents of Honduras, and he was now the owner of both Honduras and Guatemala, and that was the end of the lawsuit over the exhausted lands that were now of no use either to Guatemala or Honduras. There was a Nicaraguan abroad, a NICA from Niconohomo, working for the Huasteca Petroleum Co. of Tampico, and he had $5,000 saved up. And he wasn't a soldier or a politician. And he took $3,000 of the $5,000 and went off to Nicaragua to join Moncada's revolution. But by the time he arrived, Moncada was laying down his arms. He spent 3 days miserable in the People's Hill. Miserable, not knowing what to do. And he wasn't a politician or a soldier. He thought and he finally said to himself, somebody's got to do it. And then he issued his first proclamation. General Moncada sends a wire to the Americans, all my men agree to surrender except one. Mr. Stimson sends him an ultimatum. The people thanks you for nothing. Is Moncada's message to the holdout. He assembles his men in El Chipote. 29 men, and with him, 30, against the USA. Except one. One from Niconohomo. And with him, 30. Anyone who sets out to be a savior winds up on the cross, says Moncada in another message. Because Moncada and Sandino were neighbors. Moncada from Masatepe and Sandino from Niconohomo. And Sandino replies to Moncada. Death is quite unimportant. And to Stimson, I have faith in the courage of my men. And to Stimson, after the first defeat. Anybody that thinks we're defeated doesn't know my men. And he wasn't a soldier or a politician. And his men. Many of them were kids, with palm leaf hats and sandals or barefoot, with machetes, old men with white beards, 12-year-olds with their rifles, whites, inscrutable Indians, and blondes, and kinky-haired blacks with tattered pants and with no provisions, their pants in shreds, parading in Indian file with the flag up front, a rag hoisted on a branch from the wood, silent beneath the rain, and weary, their sandals sloshing in the puddles of the town. Long live Sandino. And they came down from the mountain and they went back up the mountain, marching, sloshing, with the flag up front. A barefoot or sandaled army with almost no weapons. That had neither discipline nor disorder, where neither officers nor troops got any pay but nobody was forced to fight, and they had different military ranks but they were all equal, everybody getting the same food and clothing, the same ration for everybody. And the officers had no aides, more like a community than an army, and more united by love than by military discipline, even though there has never been greater unity in an army. A happy army, with guitars and hugs. A love song was its battle hymn. If Adelita went off with another guy, I'd go after her by land and by sea. If by sea on an armored cruiser, and if by land on an armored train. We all greet each other with hugs. Sandino used to say, and nobody hugged like him. And whenever they talked about themselves they'd say all of us. We're all equal. Here we're all brothers, Umanzar used to say. And they were all united until they were all killed. Fighting against airplanes with hayseed troops, with no pay except food and clothing and arms, and hoarding each bullet as though it were made of gold, with mortars made out of pipes and with bombs made out of rocks and pieces of glass, stuffed with dynamite from the mines and wrapped in hides, with hand grenades made of sardine cans. He's a bandito, Somoza used to say, a bandolero. And Sandino never owned any property. Which, translated, means, it was Somoza calling Sandino an outlaw. And Sandino never owned any property. And at banquets Moncada called him a bandit, and up in the mountains Sandino had no salt and his men shivering with cold in the mountains, and he mortgaged his father-in-law's house in order to free Nicaragua, while in the presidential mansion Moncada had Nicaragua mortgaged. Of course he isn't one, said the American minister laughing, but we call him a bandit technically. What's that light way off there? Is it a star? It's Sandino's light shining in the Black Mountain. There they are, he and his men, beside the red bonfire with rifles slung and wrapped in their blankets, smoking or singing sad songs from the north, the men motionless and their shadows in motion. His face was as vague as that of a ghost, remote because of his brooding and thinking and serious because of the campaigns and the wind and the rain. And Sandino had the face not of a soldier but of a poet changed into a soldier through necessity, and of a nervous man controlled by serenity. There were two faces superposed on his face, a countenance somber and yet radiant, sad as a mountain evening and joyful as a mountain morning. In the light his face became young again, and in the shadow it filled with weariness. And Sandino wasn't intelligent or cultured. But he turned out to have mountain intelligence. In the mountain everything is a teacher, Sandino used to say, dreaming of Segovias filled with schools, and he got messages from all the mountains, and it seemed as if every cabin was spying for him, where foreigners were like brothers, all foreigners, even the Americans, even the Yankees. And, God will speak through the Segovians. He would say, I never thought I'd come out of this war alive, but I've always believed it was a necessary war. And, do they think I'm going to turn into a big landowner? It's midnight in the Segovia Mountains. And that light is Sandino. A light with a song. If Adelita went off with another guy. But nations have their destiny. And Sandino never became president. It was Sandino's murderer who became president, and he was president for 20 years. If Adelita went off with another guy, I'd go after her by land and by sea. The truce was signed. They loaded the arms onto wagons. Blunderbusses held together with hemp rope, scaly rifles, and a few old machine guns. And the wagons came down through the mountains. If by sea on an armored cruiser, and if by land on an armored train. A telegram from the American minister, Mr. Lane, to the Secretary of State, sent in Managua on the 14th of February 1934 at 6:05 p.m. and received in Washington at 8:50 p.m. Informed by official sources that the plane could not land in Waivali and that Sandino's arrival is therefore delayed. The telegram of the American minister, Mr. Lane, to the Secretary of State on the 16th of February announcing Sandino's arrival in Managua was not printed in the State Department, memorandum. Like the otter that came out of the thicket onto the highway and is surrounded by dogs and stands still facing the hunters because it knows it has nowhere to go. I talked with Sandino for half an hour, said Somoza to the American minister, but I can't tell you what he talked about because I don't know what he talked about, because I don't know what he talked about. And so, you see, I'll never own any property. And it is unconstitutional, Sandino would say. The National Guard is unconstitutional. An insult, said Somoza to the American minister on the 21st of February at 6 p.m. An insult. I want to stop Sandino. 4 prisoners are digging a hole. Who's dead? Asked one prisoner. Nobody, said the guard. Then what's the hole for? None of your business, said the guard, go on digging. The American minister is having lunch with Moncada. Will you have coffee, sir? Moncada sits looking out the window. Will you have coffee, sir? It's very good coffee, sir. What? Moncada looks away from the window toward the servant. Oh, yes, I'll have coffee. And he laughed, certainly. In a barracks 5 men are in a locked room with guards at the doors and windows. One of the men has only one arm. The fat BAME-led officer comes in and he says to them, yes. Another man is going to have supper with the president that night, the man for whom they were digging the hole, and he tells his friends, let's go. It's time. and they go up to have supper with the president of Nicaragua. At 10 p.m. they drive down to Managua. Halfway down the guards stop them. The two oldest are taken off in one car and the other three in another car in another direction, to where 4 prisoners had been digging a hole. "Where are we going?" asked the man they made the hole for. And nobody answered him. Then the car stopped and a guard said to them, "Get out." The 3 of them got out, and a one-armed man shouted, "Fire." "I was at a concert," said Somoza. And it was true, he had been at a concert. Or at a banquet or watching a dancer dance or at some crap or other. And at 2 o'clock that night Somoza was scared. Suddenly out there the phone rang. Sandino is on the phone. And he was scared. One of his friends said, "Don't be an idiot, you goddamned fool." Somoza said not to answer the phone. The dancer went on dancing for the murderer. And out there in the dark the phone went on ringing and ringing. By the light of a flood lamp 4 guards are filling in a hole. And by the light of a February moon. It's the hour when the calm mush star of Chantails gets the little Indian girls up to make corn mush, and out come the chicle seller, the wood seller, and the root seller, with the banana groves still silvered by the moon, with the cry of the coyote and the honey bear and the hooting of the owl in the moonlight. The pacas and the agoutis come out of their holes and the tickbirds and the kittajos hide in theirs. The weeper goes weeping along the river banks. Do you find him? No. Do you find him? No. A bird cackles like the creaking of a tree, then the ravine is hushed as if listening to something, and suddenly a scream. The bird utters the same sad word, the same sad word. The ranch hands begin to herd their cows, toot-a-doo-doo, 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 the boatmen hoist the sails of their boats, the telegraph clerk in San Rafael del Norte wires, "Good morning, all is well in San Rafael del Norte," and the telegraph clerk in Juigalpa, "All is well in Juigalpa." And the tucasquas keep coming down the hidden river with the ducks going quack quack quack, and the echoes, while the tugboat goes with the tucasquas slithering over the green glass river toward the Atlantic. And meanwhile in the drawing rooms of the presidential mansion and in the prison yards and in the barracks and in the American legation and in the police station those who kept watch that night saw one another in the ghostly dawn with hands and faces as though stained with blood. "I did it," Somoza said afterward. "I did it, for the good of Nicaragua." And William Walker said, when they were going to execute him, "The president of Nicaragua is a Nicaraguan." In April, in Nicaragua, the fields are dry. It's the month of brush burning, of heat, and pastures covered with embers, and coal-colored hills, of hot winds, and air that smells charred, and of fields made blue by the smoke and the dust clouds of the tractors uprooting trees, of the riverbeds dry as roads and the branches stripped like roots, of suns blurred and blood-red and moons huge and red as suns and the far-off brush fires, at night, like stars. In May come the first rains. The tender grass is reborn from the ashes. The muddy tractors plow the earth. The roads fill with butterflies and puddles, and the nights are cool and insect-laden, and it rains all night. In May the malinches blossom in the streets of Managua. But April in Nicaragua is the month of death. They killed them in April. I was with them in the April Rebellion and I learned to handle a rising machine gun. And Adolfo Baez-Bone was my friend. They hunted him with airplanes, with trucks, with floodlights, with tear gas bombs. With radios, with dogs, with police, and I remember the red clouds over the presidential mansion like blood-red swabs of cotton, and the red moon over the presidential mansion. The underground radio kept saying he was alive. The people didn't believe he had died. And he hasn't died. Because at times a man is born in a land and he is that land. And the land in which that man is buried is that man. And the men who afterward are born in that land are that man. And Adolfo Baez-Bone was that man. If they asked me to choose my fate. Baez-Bone had said to me 3 days before, to choose between dying murdered like Sandino or being president like Sandino's murderer, I'd choose Sandino's fate. And he did choose his fate. Glory isn't what the history books teach, it's a flock of buzzards in a field and a great stink. But when a hero dies, he doesn't die, for that hero is reborn in a nation. Afterward the USA sent more arms to Somoza. It took about half a morning for the arms to go by, trucks and trucks loaded with crates of arms all marked USA. Made in USA, arms to catch more prisoners, to hunt down books, to steal 5 pesos from Juan Podesme. I saw those arms going along Roosevelt Avenue. And people silent in the streets watched them go by, the skinny one, the barefoot one, the one with the bicycle, the black one, the blubber-lipped, the girl dressed in yellow, the tall one, the blonde, the bald one, the one with the big mustache, the snub-nosed one, the straight-haired, the kinky-haired, the squat one. 12. And the faces of all those people were the face of a dead ex-lieutenant. The mambo music used to come down as far as Managua. With his eyes red and blurred like the eyes of a shark, but a shark with a bodyguard and armaments, Nicaraguan shark Somoza was dancing the mambo 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 yummy mambo when they were killing them. And Takaido Somoza, the son, goes up to the presidential mansion to change a blood-stained shirt for a clean one. Stained with blood and chili. The prison dogs would howl with pity. People living near the barracks would hear the screams. At first it was a single scream in the middle of the night, and afterward more and more screams, and afterward a silence. Then a volley and a single shot. Afterward another silence, and an ambulance. And in the jail the dogs are howling again. The sound of the iron door closing behind you, and then the questions begin and the accusation of conspiracy and the confession, and then the hallucinations, the snapshot of your wife shining like a spotlight in front of you, and the nights filled with shrieks and with noises and with silence, a tomb-like silence, and again the same question, and the same noise repeated, and the spotlight in your eyes, and then the long months that followed. Oh, to be able to sleep in your own bed tonight without the fear of being pulled out of bed and taken out of your house, the fear of knocks on the door or doorbells ringing in the night. Shots sound in the night, or they seem to be shots. Heavy trucks go by, and they stop, and they go on. You've heard their voices. It's at the Comer. They must be changing the guard. You've heard their laughter and their weapons. The tailor across the street has turned on his light. And it seemed as though they knocked here. Or at the tailor's. Maybe tonight you're on the list. And the night goes on. And there's a lot of night left. And the day will be only a sunlit night. The quietness of night under the scorching sun. Mr. Whelan, the American minister, attends the party at the presidential mansion. The lights of the mansion can be seen all over Managua. The music from the party reaches even the prison cells in the gentle breeze of Managua under martial law. The prisoners in their cells manage to hear the music among the screams of prisoners getting electric shocks. Up at the mansion Mr. Whelan says. Fine party. As the xenophobich Roosevelt said to Sumner Wells. Somoza is a xenophobich, but he's ours. A slave to foreigners and a tyrant to his people, imposed by intervention and kept in power by non-intervention. Somoza forever. The spy who goes out by day. The agent who goes out by night, and the night arrest, those who are jailed for talking on a bus or for shouting hooray or for a joke. Accused of talking against His Excellency the President. And the ones judged by a toad-faced judge or in courts martial with dog-faced guards, and the ones forced to drink piss and eat shit. When you all get a constitution, remember them, the ones with the bayonet in the mouth and the needle in the eye, the electric shocks and the spotlight in the eyes. He's a xenophobich, Mr. Wells, but he's ours. And in Guatemala, in Costa Rica, in Mexico, the exiles wake up at night screaming, dreaming that they're getting the little machine again, or that they're tied up once more watching Takaido coming at them with the needle. And he was good looking, you know. Said a campesino. Yes, it was him. And good looking, you know. White skin, with his little yellow short-sleeved shirt. The good-looking bastard. When night falls in Nicaragua, the presidential mansion fills with shadows. And faces appear. Faces in the darkness. Blood-covered faces. Adolfo Baez Bone, Pablo Lil without a tongue, my classmate Luis Gaboardi whom they burned alive and he died shouting death to Somoza. The face of the 16-year-old telegraph clerk, we don't even know his name, who sent secret messages at night to Costa Rica, trembling telegrams across the night, from the dark Nicaragua of Taco, and the boy won't be mentioned in the history books, and he was caught, and he died looking at Taquito, his face is still looking at him. The kid they caught at night sticking up posters Somoza is a thief and some laughing guards drag him off into the woods. And so many other shadows, so many other shadows, the shadows of the flocks of buzzards at Wilwilai, the shadow of Estrada, the shadow of Umanzar, the shadow of Socrates Sandino, and the great shadow, the one of the great crime, the shadow of Augusto Caesar Sandino. Every night in Managua the presidential mansion fills with shadows. But the hero is born when he dies and green grass is reborn from the ashes. 15. Nicaraguan Canto. To the FSLN. During May the thrush sings in the morning when the rains are starting, but toward evening in July, when the day's showers are over, the thrush sings sweetly and in freedom, in the north. Later, the trumpeting zanate, Casadix nicaraguensis, a Nicaraguan bird, flies blue-black-violet in October, or November, over Nicaraguan villages. It is a proletarian bird, no glamour, always found among the poor. The throat-cut bird, red splash on neck, sings in the orchards. The Toledo, black velvet with a scarlet cap, sings Toledo to Ledo where coffee grows. The fijil, night-colored in its plumage, sings pihul pihul pihul, and eats the ticks off cattle. The beggar bird calls out tres pesos tres pesos tres pesos. The lesser oriole sings in the fields its tail tip-tilted and every moonlit night the owl laments in cemeteries and ruins. The shrieker of the river Escondido, always hidden one hears the shriek one never sees the bird. In the hills of Quiriguas there are quetzales. In summer iguanas lay their eggs. Lizards are born in early winter. Frogs begin to croak with the first rains in May. In June the thrush constructs its nest. The alligators which have phosphorescent eyes at night lay their eggs in July when turtles bury theirs along the beach on moonless nights. Then come the storms. It is the season of gales. Those heavy joyful downpours. Called the Just Judge, from its song, the Justochways sings Justochways 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 all through September on the barbed wire fences. And in September migrant swallows crowd the lake. October, the fork-tailed ducks arrive. The swallows leave assembling first on telegraph wires along the roads. Crows pass through Matagalpa in November and they return in May when the corn is young to eat its tender cobs, a campesino said. In December the odor of insecticide is in the air and in December the zanates lay their eggs, their young hatch out in March, and there's a clamor in their nests all summer up the palm trees. In January the golden orioles begin to build, neat golden nests suspended from pijave palms, they lay in February, and by October their deserted nests are like a village of thatched huts abandoned to slow disintegration by the wind. In February cedars flower and the buenista sings on the Atlantic coast while nest building. Oak trees in Solentiname bloom in March above the lake with blossoms rosy as girls' lips. And in summer, the Xixitote sings the loveliest song of any bird in Nicaragua and the cucarachi sings its name in summer nest building while the shellfish are harvested in Bluefields Bay in March and April and in Ocotal, in April, the quetzal rears its young. But another country found it needed all these riches. To obtain the 1911 loans Nicaragua had to cede her customs rights also the running of the National Bank to lenders who reserved the right to take it over. For those of 1912 she pledged the railroads also. On February 2, 1911, the banking group Brown Brothers & Co. acquired an interest in us. Paying off one loan meant setting up another, and so on. Once in there's no way out. Bankers gathered round like barracudas. The Marines landed to re-establish order and they stayed in Nicaragua for 13 years. Control over railroads, customs, banks was not enough. Nicaragua sold her territory as well on $3-5 a week. Adolfo Diaz, an Angeles Mining Co. employee, became the capitalist of the revolution, lending $600,000 to the cause. The repayment of the Brown Brothers loan was underwritten with the customs revenue. Corruption. National corruption was the banker's banquet, a buzzard's banquet, a ring of buzzard gentlemen in morning coats. Politicians, like blind bats hanging over us to shit upon us in the dark and piss on us, the shit and piss of bats as black as night, black wings beating black air. $500,000 more borrowed to stabilize the exchange, but oh, the banker's banquet, nor does the money even have to leave New York. The pledge involved placing the country in the banker's hands. The loan of 1911 was negotiated to establish a national bank which never left the foreign bankers' hands. Brown Brothers went and bought what paper they desired, I mean what paper money they desired, at 20 pesos to the dollar while selling at 12.50, what paper they desired, which means that 20 pesos cost a single dollar, and they could buy up as many as they wished, but when sold back, which they could do at will, were worth $1.60. I.e., they bought their money cheap to sell it dear, bought it from Nicaragua to sell it back, which pushed our prices up, corn, housing, education, dances, railroad tickets. That was how the banker mafia's looting worked. They attacked our national currency like gangsters. And then the bankers lent the land its money back at 6%. The national revenues, collected by those foreign bankers, placed in a national bank controlled by the same foreign bankers, and distributed by the same foreign bankers in association with the U.S. Secretary of State, himself a shareholder of the Angeles Mining Co. Like the Honduran taxes taken up by Morgan. Morgan the fierce, like the wild boar slashing charge or the stench of puma on the wind. Later even national territory was sold, under the Bryan Chamorro Treaty, for $3 million, which also went straight into the foreign bankers' hands. Whereby the United States acquired exclusive rights over a canal zone 2, Caribbean Isles 1 naval base, our country, for $3 million, the cash to the bankers, the customs continuing in the lenders' hands for an unspecified period till all debts should be paid, and the lenders have acquired the National Bank, likewise the State Railroad, where they bought a 51% interest for $1 million more, until of all that once made up the nation only the flag remained. Dark night. The hut without kerosene. An owl hoots mournfully over the land. The little pidgeon's song is silenced. There was no need for actual annexation. Financial domination satisfied the states, with power over all presidents from Diaz to the present incumbent, giving all the advantages of annexation without the risks or the expense. Unless one simply plays with words. A professor, to the Daily News, in Paris, ca. 1928. Nobody doubts that Nicaragua's independence is non-existent. To invest capital in Nicaragua and then protect U.S. investments was the State Department's job. Political expansion with a view to economic expansion. Economic expansion because capital did not produce enough in the United States, or not as much as it could do in Nicaragua, that is, imperialism, namely interventions for investments, or vice versa. Diplomacy held the country in subjection through the bankers, and the bankers got the money out of Nicaragua by diplomacy. The morning buzzards gathered round in morning dress. Round Nicaragua's G.N.P. Just as sharks when they scent blood. Internal disorganization and corruption fostered foreign intervention. Consequently, intervention fostered the disorganization and corruption and developed them, that stares you in the face. Whence, therefore, imperialism as a disturbing and disrupting element, etc., fostering backwardness, corruption, etc. in Nicaragua, violating treaties, constitutions, judicial decisions, provoking civil war, manipulating elections, bribing. It has protected thieves, prostituted politics, impoverished the people, impeded union, kept its agents in power against the people's will, thereby raised the cost of living, defended oppression, and brought death. Thus Nicaragua, when Sandino appeared, found herself with part of her territory alienated, the external debt sky high, financial life entirely subject to the group of New York bankers, and no progress. The whole country, as Cape, thanks be to God, is now, down to a single line of huts, one street, and in it, 6 feet from the sea, a buzzard squabbling over fish guts with a dog. I said iguanas lay their eggs. It is the process. They, or else the frogs, in the silence of the Carboniferous age made the first sound, sang the first love song here on earth, sang the first love song here beneath the moon. It is the process. The process started with the stars. New relations of production, that too is part of the process. Oppression. After oppression, liberation. The revolution started in the stars, millions of light years away. The egg of life is one. From the first bubble of gas, to the iguana's egg, to the new man. Sandino was proud he had been born from the womb of the oppressed, that of an Indian girl from Nicono Homo. From the womb of the oppressed the revolution will be born. It is the process. The male pelican puffs out his chest to court the female before mating. But the process still goes further. Che smiling beyond death as though just back from Hades. Muhammad's paradise about which Gage spoke, I tell you paradise has been sold up. The promised land divided by latifundistas. The land where I belong, just like the Tigielotira dove or Bigfoot pigeon. 9 Diary, Nicono Homo, Monum Bonandame, Diria, Diriamo. Ox of our youth which Dario once saw puffing vapor. The clamorous peahens which we heard when we were lads. The loud-mouthed swearing. We'd go to the river's mouth for clams. The cactus hopper in the cactus hedges. Jays squabbling over mangoes, robbing nests. Green parakeets along a branch, like shrieking leaves, and when they rise you'd think the branch was flying. There was a cur calling on a dry pole meaning drought. 5 p.m. and the hand slap of tortillas being made and the smell of the tortillas on the griddle and the scent of wood smoke. The hour when the washerwomen returned to 9 Diary from the lagoon. A flight of herons over Lake Managua. The hour I'd go to meet my girlfriend from the typing school. The hour when the first lights go on, and the last pairs of macaws fly homeward. Managua, Reuben long-haired, with girlfriend, on the quay watching the white herons, and the brown. The evening breeze a soft caress. He with his brown heron. The first kiss. How often have we Nicaraguans overseas said over drinks ours is a land of shit. In cheap hotels where exiles meet, but then we'd start remembering taviales, and tripe soup with coriander and wild chili peppers, the songs to the Purisima in December, with the scent of madrono trees in bloom, the blue lake and on the lake the flight of a heron like a white sail or the small sailing boat that's like a heron, and one began to think about the scents of May, the warmth and smell of Nicaragua. A rainy patio and the roof tiles wet tick 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 tick, the small sound of water dripping off the roof, the whistle of the steamship Victoria as it draws near Granada, a land we said deserving better luck. And one has also thought about windmills looking in the distance like iron roses, the song a railway engine sings in open country, bringing the cattle home, milking early in the morning, the smell of cheese in the cheese women's boats, a line of telegraph poles slanting across a meadow. The Victoria at the quayside, or a taka plain. A cotton field in flower, looking like snow, a tractor working in it with the shape of Momotombo in the background. And the little diesel train to Leon which hugs the lake. Or, Momotombo lit by the setting sun, the lake all orange-yellow like the scales of a mojara, a youngster fishing in Maytir and the whistle of that Leon train. Reuben always made the trip from Momotombo to Managua in a little steamer. Watching the white herons, and the brown. The lovely women. Sipping their cocktails or cognac, he tells us, in the small saloon. Flowers provoked in him a feeling of voluptuous lassitude. On a coffee plantation, a girl the color of chocolate gave him clear water in a gourd. He saw the gourd was carved with shields, birds, letters, floral patterns, geometrical designs. Masaya made him think of Hafiz, flowers in the gardens, flowers in women's hair. The mayor had the main street strewn with flowers. Volcan Masaya, standing close to 9 Diary. In ages past, so Victor Hugo says, Momotombo did not love Masaya's god because he was so cruel. Oh, don't hit me. Oh, don't hit me. I'm a middle or you'll kill me. I'm Amita. His face one livid mass. Nose cheeks forehead all one livid mass. The left eye almost out. And the major, hit him harder. Hit him harder. Kill him. Beating with the butt of his own carbine, bellowing, hit him harder. 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 Kill the bastard. Kill. He's got to die. The soldiers kept on beating him with bundles of electric wires. He lay there naked in the water trough. Hit him. Hit him harder. Go on hitting. Kill. Kill. And then he took the wires himself. And started kicking him. Right on the heart. You bastard, I'll soon kill you, and the major wound a steel wire round his neck. The lad ran 15 yards and fell. Left eye half out. The right side of his face so swollen that it seemed to join the neck. Dragged himself as far as the latrine. And died. The body was thrown down the crater of Volcan Masaya, the Hell of Masaya, as the Spaniards called it. Oviedo, who had seen it, in the deepest and the furthest part of this great pit there was a liquid fire, of the consistency of water, brighter than red hot coals, more fiery than fire itself, if the expression be permitted, and boiling, not everywhere but here and there, the seething wandering from place to place, with a continuous plopping bubbling sound from end to end. According to the Indian headman Nindiri, at certain times a naked wizened hag would rise out of the pit to tell them whether they were going to win, or else that it was going to rain and there would be much corn, and they threw in a man as sacrifice, or perhaps two, or more, some women maybe, and some boys and girls. But since the Christians came that wizened hag rose much less often. Indeed hardly ever. Saying Christians were all evil and till they were gone she would not meet the Indians. He added she was very old and wrinkled, breasts down to her belly button, hair scanty and swept back, teeth long and sharp, like those of dogs, skin far darker than the Indians, eyes sunken, blazing. For the devil was a murderer from the beginning. Then there was Don Manuel Zavala, self-exiled in New York since 20, saying at 75 that he would not return to Nicaragua while the gangster stayed in power, never calling him by name, just the gangster. When a sick man he came back to his sister's house, the gangster still in power, dying in his dear Granada, under the gangster's rule. Coronel knew an old man in Granada who often said, "I wish I were a foreigner, so that I could go home." Or Gilberto, who dreamed of emigrating, anywhere, to England for example, but with the Lake of Nicaragua, Zanates, the Granada to Managua train, pigs crackling with yucca, and Coronel Urtco. Sails and herons on the deep deep blue. A lake the color of blue jeans, as William put it. Such beauty was surely given us for love. A launch out in mid-lake level with San Ubaldo. Moor hens over toward Colon. The lake by moonlight. The moon above the lake, the water moon-colored. So much beauty, for equality. The lake on a calm night, and a motor launch a long way off. We'd go, the gang of us, to fish for laguneros and guavities. The land which I shall give you, quoth Jehovah. And there are old sunken wrecks which date back to the filibusters, or the transit company, Vanderbilt's old paddle steamers in which the sharks now breed, perhaps with just the funnel showing among the weeds and duck droppings. Vanderbilt didn't even know how to say Nicaragua. He said Nicaragua. The jetty at Moyagal paraded through. The land is not a whore, but now they've tried to sell her to a ghost recluse in a hotel, to the spectre Howard Hughes. The jetty at Moyagal paraded through the black gaps which one had to jump by moonlight, the launch which reached San Miguelito in the dawn. They sold black coffee on the pier, and fried fish in tortillas as the sun came up, with shades of green reflected in still water. A lad with a string of fish, the red and gold Moeris. Land stolen from us. Bankers, the Somoza dynasty, the companies they've stolen it, and steal it every day. My homeland with its rivers, with my lovely rivers, huts with beached canoes and clothes hung out to dry, latrines reflected in the water, and a rowing boat which heads downstream likewise reflected, cutting a sheet of glass, a woman in it wearing red. And the coffee-colored beach hen with lemon-yellow wings, spindle-shanked, deft stepping over the great water lilies light as a flower itself. The water is the hue of a guapote's scales inshore there where the yellow sorrowcantil blooms a blue macaw in flight a needle duck swims past, snake-necked sharp-billed, a fast boat with an outboard motor passes and an egret shoots out startled. The scent of cedar blossom. Hum of the sawmill by the river. White herons at the edge each whitely mirrored. The new moon no broader than a slender heron. It grows dark in the Escondido and the Cuaco quacks. Here we must build a country. We stand on the threshold of a promised land which flows with milk and honey, like a woman mel et lac sub lingua toi the kiss comes when it should and in due course the kisses in the land which I shall give thee keep not thy brother illiterate that he may gather in thy cotton and thy coffee. Quoth Jehovah. A land promised for the revolution. With all things held in common as they were before the fall of our first parents I have seen green banana groves and sugar cane a different shade of green. A meadow of zacate with some cows and the track leading on between oak pines. I've dreamed of seeing art schools here and nursery schools. I recall low ridges, yellow after burning, then plains with calabash trees and thorn bushes. A pocoyo hopping along in front of the jeep at night its bird's eyes gleaming in the headlights. I recall coffee plantations at Telpanca. Tobacco growing at Jalapa. Jave Caro, where the cocoa flows over gold dust and white sand. Beyond Jalapa the scent of balsam firs. Or, seen from a bus, a windmill, a small church on a hill, a country cemetery. Macaws will always fly in pairs and cross the evening sky gossiping, or squabbling, in macaw language. I recall, though I don't quite know why, that little shop in San Rafael del Norte, after dark, lit up, with a group of girls inside. I saw mountains covered in pine woods, with mountain pigeons cooing and the song of little widows. There in the square of Quilali hangs the propeller of a plane Sandinos men shot down which now serves as village bell. And there I heard the little widows sing their lonely sad lament. And there Sandino dreamed of campesinos running great cooperatives. Beyond, the huts of the Mosquito Indians begin, on stilts along the Coco River, like birds' nests. Houses, schools, transport, hospitals, roads, adequate food, hydroelectric plants, but at present just the beauty of arriving at a palm leaf hut when the mosquitoes start and the first star comes out. We saw a jaguar's paw mark and we found the hut had been abandoned. And the sadness of the evening, then, and the mosquitoes. The Tuma. Oh, to see the Tuma country once again. Coffee in bloom, and calm. In March the cobs are tender. Mist over the coffee plantations and, in the mist, the whitish scent of coffee flowers, like that of orange blossom, with shishitotes singing and the whistler. Campesino, campesino, what lovely fields you have. It's a shame that capitalists own them. Or, dark burned fields, near San Jose de los Remates, with, beyond, forests of cedar and lignum vitae trees and toucans calling. And a lion bird, long-tailed and tawny as a lion, going poon poon poon. The forests where the quetzal lives which cannot live when caged, the quetzal's habitat, and that of Sandinistas. The Bijigual, a mountain in the north, up the Muzon. The Tapacusay, the Quayabu, the Taisi, the Tamabu, all mountains in the area of Estili. Pais Pais, Candigat, Ya, Quilali, Yelagiana, Palacagina Mui Mui. Here we've dreamed of a land for which we've fought many battles, so many battles. Pais Pais, Pedron was there, he seized the mines, and there is so much, brother, to be done. Cucarawalla River. Jaguars in heat roaring by moonlight along its banks, and when they roar the monkeys shriek in fear. We're going to build schools along the Cucarawalla. A just social system which will ensure that the rule of social inequality does not return. El Chipote, a damp and misty mountain where the sun never gets through the trees, with white-faced monkeys and macaws among the thickets, of oak pine sweet gums, mahogany with creepers and lianas, that's where he established his headquarters, pocoya screeching, jaguars roaring, toucans trilling. High in its nest in the tallest of the liquid amber trees, at maybe 60 feet, the quetzal sings its lovely territorial song. When still, you'd never see it, mimicking the light beneath a cloudy sky, Its feathers are like leaves in mist, but if the sun comes through it's iridescent, a camouflage of sunlight on bright leaves. There he was based, green-clad, a wide-brimmed hat, red neckerchief. Pearl Lagoon. Huawa Lagoon. And Sandy Bay. Long sand banks where beneath the moon the Kari turtles come for love-making. Punta Gorda Lighthouse at Ioo feet above the sea. The Bay of Moncaibal by Punta Mico. And on these cays are coconuts. And on these coasts are lobsters. The water blue, white cays, covered with white guano, lined with coconut palms. Mico River. The Saikia. I can still see the dugouts, that's where the rubber tappers go. There too the brightly colored dawn bird sings. League upon league of coconuts along the Atlantic coast. Canoes and motorboats which cut through glassy waters that soon revert to mirrors. A tiny village on a sand bank with a lonely lighthouse, the surging of the waves, plop plop of an electric generator, palm trees which sway in the sea breeze, the moon behind the palm trees' silhouette. The forest trees are felled in summer and the logs are marked with paint or iron and dragged by tractor or oxen to the gullies, to be swept down to the sea by the first rains. I'd like to watch the lumberjacks at work. To talk to turtle catchers on the cays. This is the land I sing. My poetry belongs here, like the trumpeting zanate, or the wine-producing palm. I feel a longing for those eastern swamps. And grow nostalgic when I think of Principalca. The bay blue with a banana boat at anchor in the bay. Banana groves along the riverbank with plains behind, lagoons like quetzal plumage, and then one reaches Sumo Indians' huts, a love song in the Sumo tongue, or in Mosquito. And in those channels, sharks. I law united fruit. I law standard fruit. Companies have passed through here like cyclones. There have been Sundays when Mosquito girls went naked to the Baptist church, Mosquito girls who had no clothes to wear. And people have quite literally died of hunger here. Brother Pedron Altamirano. When I think of the sad light of miners' lamps, I see the gold which travels down a side stream of the Principalca going on its way to vaults of Wall Street banks. It's Wall Street that the sunbird sings against in Principalca. The struggle was a national one, Sandino said, adding that it would be international one. In Mr. Spencer's gold mines they x-ray each miner twice a year to see if he shows symptoms of TB. If there's a shadow, he's paid off at once. In due course he spits blood, and tries to claim, in good health when dismissed, he'd caught the disease later. No, the mine is not responsible. And so he dies on a Managua sidewalk. If he is a Sumo or Mosquito Indian, he goes home, infects his village. Whole villages have been wiped out this way. Companies have stripped the coast like locusts, bare stumps where pinewoods used to stand. Nothing will ever grow where they have been. Here Magnavox passed through, attracted by the scent of raw materials. In the words of that president of General Motors, what's good for General Motors is good for the United States and vice versa. Imperialism says it wants to make us happy. Great forests on both banks, and in between the river like another, liquid, forest. Suppose it's a mosquito settlement that we have reached and a mosquito love song that we hear, with the word love kupiak timi, one single heart. One single heart. The military and money look like that today, but those two have no heart. No, the sole true kupiakumi is love, namely the union of the people to achieve the revolution. Only love is truly single heart. Not Caribbean Baini or Lumber Co. Bluefields Lumber Co. Gold Mining Co. Loose Mines Ltd. American Smelting and Refining Co. Neptune Mining Co. Longleaf Pines Co. Kyocera Development Co. Nicaragua Lumber Co. The list seems endless. Magnavox. The list seems endless. General Sandino. The Marines are at the hut. At the hut to rape the girl. You brother walk unshod but you own tungsten. Illiterate brother with antimony mines. ITT is on the prowl. Like a jaguar seeking whom it may devour. That's as certain as that general you know who likes raping little girls. More campesinos get chucked out of helicopters. Monsignor Chavez still keeps blessing the regime. Did someone say the Minister of Economics would protect his people, rather than eso? The encomienda system still survives. And when the bell rings daily to halt dealings on the New York Stock Exchange, you can be sure that they have taken something from you, brother, which you did not even know was yours. When Wall Street dealers say, "We dropped $5 million cash this afternoon," that means in Wall Street parlance that they bought $5 million worth of stocks and shares. Secretaries of State may come and go like migrant birds, but Standard Oil remains. The Canadian said to the mosquito, "Communism is bad, it takes all that we own." And the mosquito, who listens to Radio Havana in Mosquito, answered, "Bad for you, got everything, good for mosquito, he not got anything." It would be international one day, Sandino said. He also used to tell the campesinos, "One day we are going to win. Should I not see it, the little ants will come to tell me in my grave." Dario prophesied, triumphantly received on coming home, a yet more glorious country, in a toast to youth, "Poor good Reuben. I drink to lasting victory for this land of ours." That was in 1910, the next year 1911 saw the coming of the bankers. The fight is with us still, Sandino versus the Marines. How many chopping brushwood in the hills might match Dario? Hut dwellers in perpetual night. The boot black who might have been a great philosopher. The goat herd a great painter. Not only just not knowing how to read or write, not even how to think, wish, dream. See those buses laden with the poor? They're the true owners. They put up the Bank of America building, who the hell knows how tall, and they, who else, the bridges and the reservoirs. All they need do is take things over. The poor. Above all, the very very poor, that fucking load of stinking shit eaters. A flight of jet stains the blue sky, and don't you know that they've excluded you from civilization, brother? Yet it's your lemongrass which gives, though you don't know it, the citronella which those jets require. Your golden hardwood used to make truck floors, your lignum vitae for propellers, pulleys, and... oh well. Play me this song on your guitar. Things do matter, hut people matter more. One suddenly comes on the camp, beneath mahogany and ceiba trees, huts with fireplaces, and earthenware jars, stones to grind calm, beds of rawhide, strips of salted meat, a carbide lamp in front of a St. Anthony, calabashes closed with corncob stoppers, a young child crying in a sisal hammock with bright-colored tassels, the sounds of a Victrola, and a guitar, Sandino reading Don Quixote, in the open air, by firelight. The camp remote as any quetzal's nest. Now Sandino is back on the Chipote once again, muchachos. Once more attacking Telpanca in the night. Pedron once more down by the cocoa unless he's near Boco. Again the peasants leave cornstalks unsnapped, black kidney beans unthreshed to join Sandino and besiege the mines route. The Marines set fire to Standard Fruit Co. offices. A misty night without a moon, 140 Sandinistas take the sentries by surprise. Or Sandinistas lying in evening ambush on the track down which Marines will come. Miguel Angel Ortez looms up in the night, black-trousered with a head of long fair hair, rifles, machetes, two old-style Lewis guns, and shouts of "Viva Sandino!" Between shots, and Patria Libre o Morir. The mist dissolves, no Sandinistas there. One evening when the Marines were just about to enter a pine forest, and they did hear the throb of a guitar through trees. A sudden challenge in San Rafael del Norte from the guard post. "Halt, who goes there? Friend. Long live Nicaragua. Advance and give the password, friend. Thou shalt not sell thy country." Pedron joins forces with Ortez again to fall on Jinotega. Pedron going from village to village once again to say, "Don't use your vote." After one ambush the Marines could hear goodbyes, mules trotting carts that clattered off into the night. Budley fell wounded. Soon, campesinos running great cooperatives. The campaign against illiteracy and youngsters from Mui Mui will get their ballet school theaters in Tecalastode, in Telpanca. How clear the vision of a land where exploitation is abolished. The country's wealth shared equally, the total GNP an equal share for all. Nicaragua without the National Guard, the new day beckons. A country without fear, with no dynastic tyranny. Sing loud, Znate sound your bugle call. No beggars, no prostitution, no politicians. It's clear there can't be freedom so long as some are rich, so long as some are free to exploit others, free to steal from others. So long as there are class divisions, there's no freedom. We were born neither to serve our fellows nor to hire them, but rather to be brothers, each born to he a brother to the others. Capitalism, men buying/selling men. What else? What kind of journey, brothers, can we take while some still travel first and others third? There is nickel waiting for new man, mahogany waiting for new man, thoroughbred herds waiting for new man. The only thing still lacking is new man. Come companeros, tear down the barbed wire fences. Break with the past. Because the past was never ours. Those who'd still live off brothels. As that girl said, in Cuba, the revolution is above all else a matter of love. I'd like to see billboards by the roadside here. Your worth lies not in what you take from others, but in what you give. 2 a.m., San Rafael del Norte, thickening mist, Sandino going to the church with 6 companions to marry Blanca. He with pistol, riding boots, red neckerchief. Blanca in white, with veil, and coffee blossom garland. The groom went back into the hills through mist and coffee plants in flower. Those were the days when people sang the buzzard is already dead. They take him to his grave. Each tree, each bush, each rock could suddenly turn out to be a Sandinista sniper. Hunger isn't just a matter of tortillas and black beans, although it's also a matter of tortillas and black beans. And a poster saying that those who died for the people are gloriously risen in the people. What does the throat-cut bird proclaim, or the just judge, perched on the barbed wire fences? A new dawn and new production contracts. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. A system which understands and meets the needs of life, production determined by the needs. Example, clothes made not in order to make money, damn it, but in order to clothe people. And all luxury homes will be expropriated. All those incapable of work shall have their needs met by the state. The Tupamaro program, words of the Popolva, let all the people rise. There's so much corn to plant, so many kids to teach, so many sick to cure, and so much love to give, and so much song. I sing a country waiting to be born. The lake part blue, and partly silver, partly gold. A flight of herons in the sky, in truth it flows with milk and honey, said the explorers, and Jeremiah later, tell it to the islands. J 31, 10-13, and in the dance teenagers shall rejoice. Our own new men. Our own new men are all we lack. Ye shall enter the promised land, but yet not all shall enter, communism or the kingdom of God on earth, which is the same. General Genie's interrogation chambers shall become rooms where little girls may play with dolls and small boys with Pinocchio tanks turn into tractors and police vans into high school buses, and the machine will then be man's best friend. General of the free men, the little ants will come to tell you in your grave. What days? Those days when boys shall have Pinocchio, and when my dream comes true there'll be no rich. Let's go and write the slogan on the walls: life is subversive, or else love is the agitator, or the last words of Lionel Rugama, guerrillero, to the guard: surrender. Me. Up yours. Or write these lines by Passos on the walls: go home, go home, go home, Yankee, go home, go home. When a cur calls on a dry pole, that means drought, but when he calls on a green one, rain is near. Tear down those fences and let all the people rise, even the dead. This is the land of which I sing. Hoarsely, like the Guer Dab Aranco, which at a distance sounds just a bit like cattle lowing, he builds his nest in holes in rocky canyon walls. And like the cheerful GAs in Nicaragua's parks and orchards, the sire to gois which keeps repeating sire to GOIS, or like the GUAs in Chinandiga and Chantails which sings in the dry fields, announcing rain, thus to my song. And like the lion bird, or Cocoroco, a lonely fellow which sings in anguish to announce a puma. And like the clock bird singing out the hours. Or the Atlantic sunbird saying that dawn is here, thus do I sing. And I sing like the bird they call swamp snorter, because it snorts in marshes and in swamps, but also clearly, like Zanate's bugling Zanatalo, the bird of the oppressed, or like the creaker, grating in damp woods, or like the Che-Che of the northern hills, Gorilla Hills, which sings che 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 che, and like the happy bird whose song means feeling joy, the poet's voice sings feeling joy joy joy, and I am also like the sad cocoyo at twilight, so sadly singing screw thee too. Or tecolotes, owls with enormous spectacles, which hoot among the ruins. Or like the pidgel which, when rain is near, sings out pea hill among the sorrow-cantil's yellow flowers on the San Juan near Coronel Urtco's farm, pea hill, announcing rain. Or like the 6 o'clock bird which sings a sad song in the wilderness, but only at 6 o'clock each afternoon, when it will not stand out thus to my song. Or like perhaps the loveliest bird on earth, the quetzal of the misty forests, yet more lovely in the sunlight than the shade. Its alarm note is a harsh crack that's audible for miles. Its territorial song is a melodious, two-tone, whistle it repeats and repeats. To give AP the lie, and UP too, that also is the poet's task. Like certain birds which only sing for certain races, as Joaquin Pasos said. There are problems only when there are solutions. One single heart. 1972. Pihul pihul pihul. Pihil. Joy joy. Crack. I see thee. Gole gole. Screw thee too, screw thee too. Che che. Mary Dawn is here / Mary Dawn is here. RP. M. Mosquito Kingdom. The coronation ceremony was in Belize this time, the king riding on a white horse in procession to the church with the uniform of a British major, the others on foot with red frock coats, cast off, of British officers of all ranks and wearing sailor pants. His Majesty was placed on a seat next to the altar, and the coronation rites were performed by the chaplain acting on this occasion as the Archbishop of Canterbury. When they reached the part that says, "And all the people said, May the king live forever, long live the king," the frigates shot off their cannon, and the Indian and black vassals shouted, "Long live King Robert! God save the king!" His Majesty meanwhile seemed absorbed in looking at his lace. After the anointing he kept touching with his finger the holy oil, which was castor oil, and then putting his finger to his nose, but he did not flee in the midst of the ceremony to climb a coconut tree as his illustrious ancestor had done in Jamaica. After the ceremony the crowd went to the schoolhouse for the gala banquet, in which no food other than rum was served until king and court rolled dead drunk on the floor. Vanderbilt never in his whole wretched life had had a vacation, and this time he determined to have one in Europe, and therefore a special ship was built. No one had ever seen anything more fabulous on earth. The newspapers were stunned. No private yacht could be compared with the North Star in size or luxury, 2,500 tons, 300 feet long, enormous paddle wheels moved by 2 motors. And the walls of the vast saloons, of marble and granite. The coffered ceilings of rosewood and sandalwood, in the ceiling medallions of American heroes, the staterooms like the apartments of Cosimo de' Medici. Even though his carpet in Washington Place was frayed, and with a great cargo of ice, wines, rare foods, famous chefs from New York, and a chaplain who blessed the food. This time Vanderbilt spent without his usual inhibitions. In London the Daily News saluted the floating palace with an editorial. He was given a reception in Mansion House with many flunkies and with Carlyle. The Lord Mayor drank a toast to Mr. Vanderbilt, the foe of monopolies, and Vanderbilt made a speech the only time in his life that he did so. He saw Victoria and Prince Albert only at the opera. But in Russia Tsar Alexander lent him his carriage, and Grand Duke Constantine, his son, inspected the ship and asked permission to make a sketch of it. Emperor Napoleon, Louis, paid him no attention because he was busy with the Crimean War. They did not open the Tuileries for them, and Mrs. Vanderbilt did not see the wardrobes of the Empress Eugenie. Summer on the Mediterranean. King Bomba of the Two Sicilies. Then Greece, etc., and the millionaire got bored and went back home. But the British agents got screwed because the monarch began to sell great portions of his kingdom for barrels of rum. In 1839 the sovereign, in the 14th year of his reign, having already sold a third of Nicaragua, half of Costa Rica, and a limitless stretch of Honduras, was forced by MacDonald to make his will naming MacDonald and others as regents in case His Majesty should die before the heir apparent came of age, and shortly after this the king was kind enough to die and His Eminence Colonel MacDonald published a decree in the name of the child King George William declaring the said surrender of territories null and void, because the grantees obtained them at a time when the king was bereft of reason drunk. But the decrees of one king were worth as much as those of another, and one shepherd, an old British sailor, almost blind, in his Greytown house, San Juan del Norte, years later still kept in a cupboard those old papers, with X his mark, because the sovereign couldn't sign, of King Robert Charles Frederick, that made him the owner of a third of the Mosquito Kingdom. We, by our special grace, do give and grant from Bluefields Bay to Columbia, Panama, a total of 22 million acres, and a Texan named Kinney, who speculated in cattle and enormous chunks of Texas, acquired the moth-eaten papers of the Sea Wolf through the promise of $500,000, the biggest real estate speculation in his whole life, and he organized a so-called Central American Company with authorized capital of $5,625,000 and 21 directors and 225,000 shares at $25 a share. Each share would bring 100 acres of land on being presented at the company office in Greytown. On Wall Street they believed he was a partner of Walker, but he was more a rival. "I have land titles to begin legally," he said. "I'm going to create a government and the rest is easy." President Pierce, it was said, was on his side. But the transit company was not. In New York he recruited 500 men to capture Greytown, but before he could do it he was shipwrecked opposite Greytown. He reached Greytown shipwrecked and bankrupt to boot, with only 13 men and a printing press that he saved from the wreck. But even so he had himself elected civil and military governor by the handful of lazy inhabitants, in a democratic election, and he organized a provisional government while they were drawing up the new constitution inspired by that of the United States. 10 days later the press began to publish the newspaper, bi-monthly, the Central American, with ads for commercial firms in Greytown, import and export houses, hotels, schools, bars, lawyers, banks, clubs, doctors, bookstores, nightclubs, etc., etc., to attract immigrants. Allsop & Co., on California Street, buy and sell exchange. Benicia boarding school for young gentlemen, the Atlantic Loan and Security Bank, the Ocean House, on a romantic lagoon. Café Frank Caritas, every kind of refreshment, to attract immigrants to that place which was nothing but a swamp with 50 houses, thatched roofs, and 300 inhabitants of all colors, nearly all blacks, ex-slaves from Jamaica, fugitives from justice, and an occasional European, on the shore of a noxious lagoon, full of alligators and surrounded by the forest, a place that had been described as one of the saddest and most desolate on earth, so much so that, however varied the experiences that the traveler had had with lugubrious places, the memory of Greytown would stay with him as among the most melancholy and dismal. The only banks were sand banks covered with shark bones that obstructed the sea view. The lively dance halls of Delmonico's, open till dawn, were probably the frog-filled swamps. The monkeys, perhaps they were the music at Mike's, visit Mike's, the best restaurant. Language schools, the cockatoos. The Green Resort, perhaps wild boars and tigers. Royal Caribbean with its enchanting singers, the Jamaica Grill, Jimmy's Cafe, so many more puddles, or the luxurious St. John, with crocodiles, with mosquitoes. Make your reservation, but the immigrants did not arrive. Vanderbilt had given up the presidency of the transit company when he went to Europe, and he had made Morgan president, and while he was traveling Morgan and Garrison had made the shares fluctuate, earning enormous sums at Vanderbilt's expense, and he, who said "I don't give a shit for the law, I've got the power," when he came back just sent them a note. "Gentlemen, I will ruin you. Sincerely yours, Cornelius Vanderbilt." The transit company had never paid Nicaragua the 10% of the profits, claiming that there weren't any profits, and Nicaragua couldn't claim that there were profits because of the peculiar way the company kept its hooks, which consisted of never recording either passengers or cargo. Toward the end of December 56, the bar of the Hotel St. Charles in New Orleans had more noise and more cocktails than usual because the steamship TX's was leaving with recruits for Walker toward the lands of the sunny South, the hot, sensuous South, with the laudable intention of robbing them, but those who went to Nicaragua almost never came back, Italians who fought in Navarra, Prussians from the campaigns in Holstein, Englishmen from the Crimean War, Yankees from the expedition to Cuba. They carried the rifles in boxes shaped like coffins. And on the very same seas of Kidd and Morgan, the other Morgan, the pirate, they would scan with their telescopes the western, wood-covered coast of Cuba, saying that it would sooner or later belong to Uncle Sam. And when they got to Nicaragua they would open the coffins. Morgan and Garrison, who were losing control of the company, courted Walker so that he would confiscate it from Vanderbilt, who had never paid anything to Nicaragua, which now belonged to Walker, and would deliver to the two partners the dead corporation with a new contract that would set them up as a new company. A plan of unscrupulous captains of industry against a rival equally unscrupulous. A shark fight like those of the reef of San Juan del Norte. There was stupor on Wall Street when they learned of Walker's confiscation. Panic among the investors. They all rushed to sell their shares. On January is they had been at 18, on February 14 at 23.14. On March 14, when the news arrived, they went down to 19, and on the 18th, to 13. In 4 days 15,000 shares changed hands. Vanderbilt, wounded, attacked Walker. "Oh, the bastard," said Vanderbilt, "I'm going to screw Walker. No more boats to Nicaragua." And as Morgan and Garrison weren't ready with theirs, the filibusterer with the gray, empty eyes, that in daguerreotype seemed to be without eyelashes, and a mouth that under no circumstances did anyone ever see smile, was left trapped in Nicaragua. The immigrants didn't arrive. And the British agents didn't recognize the provisional government, and besides Walker was now in control of Nicaragua, and Kinney had no funds anymore, and besides he was ill, and many of his followers went off with Walker. For some months he vegetated in Greytown. Then he went away sick and without 1 cent. Sick and penniless. Afterward Vanderbilt sold his ships and snapped up railroads, and forgot about Nicaragua. His wife asked him, "Aren't you rich enough?" "Not yet." Just about then a newsboy ran by under his window on Washington Place shouting, "Civil War." The newspaper from San Juan del Norte with its fantastic ads is disintegrating in the Library of Congress in Washington, the librarians say, and it can't be Xeroxed, you touch it and it turns to ashes. 1972 DDW. Oracle over Managua. In back of the yam and textile factory, if there's anything left of the factory after the earthquake, and next to the drainage channel, near the lake, among rubbish, broken chamber pots, are, or were, the footprints, stamped in volcanic layer. Perhaps before there was any weaving, or even any pottery, they occupied this area of Managua together with the bison. They lived by hunting and fishing and growing crops. Tizcapa, Asos Osca, Nijapa, the present lakes were a single smoking volcano, and ashes once fell like a black snow, and the footprints were left in the stream of volcanic mud that was flowing toward the lake and solidifying under the ashes, footprints of people all going one way toward the lake, footprints fleeing from the volcano, some more sunken. It shows that some were carrying loads, not running. The steps are short and even, and there are tracks of white-tailed deer, otters, lizards, and a bird called guan, Penelope furiorescens, and bison tracks. Down upon them came the black rain. Afterward another stream of mud, and another black ash. Then thick streams of mud, several of them, all this a thick layer of stone, years that later would be Managua building materials. A short period, decades, of volcanic inactivity, patches of earth and beds of extinct rivers. Later a more distant volcano, Masaya, threw off a rain of pumice stone. Once again stillness, a yard-thick deposit of earth. Other eruptions with currents of khaki-colored mud. Another deposit of earth built up. More mud from eruptions, and finally the top layer of earth with the first pottery. Maya. Monochrome. From Nicoya, polychrome. From the time of Christ. Moon pottery, white lacquer and fine-lined motifs. Charming red jaguars with a white background, incense pots. And on top bits of Coca-Cola bottles and Goodyear tires and chamber pots. Akawalinksa begins there, the houses of cardboard and cans where the sewers empty. Streets that smell of jails, that characteristic jail smell of shit and rancid urine, houses of cement bags, gasoline cans, rubble, old rags. The sewers end there. On the shore of the lake the kids play digging little holes with a little stick to see who'll get the most flies out of his hole. In the water cotton swabs, toilet paper, a condom or two. Nearby the slaughterhouse. Buzzards sitting on its scraps. A stream of dirty cloudy water flows toward the lake to the right, the poisoned soft green lagoon of Akawalinksa. Huts in the plain where the DN trucks dump, or used to dump, Managwa's garbage, a plain of cans, papers, plastic, glass, skeletons of cars, buzzards perched on dry posts waiting for more trucks. Other sewers empty there without reaching the lake, the moonlight shimmers on the shit. There the children with wary little eyes, the children weak, sickly, enormous beetles, their bellies swollen and their legs thin as toothpicks, and when night comes he goes looking for warmth. It's a joy to see him eating dirt. Old women crouched over the guts that the slaughterhouse throws out, scaring off the buzzards. The pig and the pot-bellied kid in the same puddle. The old women now squatting at water's edge, near the drain, washing the guts they'd sell in the central market for sausage meat. I saw a papaya tree in a street like a miracle in that horror. The faces of the people, smiling, but covered with flies. Above cardboard roofs and rubble a picture postcard lake. Victims of a permanent tremor, these people will have no planes bringing canned foods, medicines, tents, drinkable water. The woman who gets attacks is there. Her husband went away in a truck and never came back. One guy earned his living selling sawdust and a truck ran over him. Far off there, beyond these pigsties, on the pier, Dario with his marble shirt against another picture postcard blue, also polluted, with the force of the diarrhea. The tip of his little asshole sprouts all night long. It's just one whale if they turn her over on her side. The rumble of her little guts sounds just like they were emptying a slop jar. He's just crazy about dirt. A moon over Akawalinksa with astronauts on it singing Frank Sinatra songs. The current flowing slowly toward the lake. The current of Managua shit, and in it prints of bare feet like the feet of the people who went along there, fleeing 10 yards deep as if it were now in fresh mud. Apollo 11. This is Houston. Over sky black as midnight and glittering earth, and the shadows of the craters black as the sky, and the beautiful earth, blue and pink, in the black sky like an oasis of life and color in the empty vastness, the most beautiful of jewels, but to the poor like craters and lunar seas. Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the moon. The woman that lost her sewing machine and then her husband, he became a drunkard. Her roof of Standard Oil cans. And the other one heavy-breasted from suckling her children. Up there, the hill, on what was left of that volcano. You dumb kid, why don't you confess? They tie my feet again. In the ruins of the volcano that made the ancestors flee the palace, with machine guns, trenches, tanks, cannons like the prehistoric eruption terrorizing the people. Now which way do we run? Looking down on all of Managua. Tizcapa. At the edge of the crater the power. At the edge of the crater the ancient terror. All night long those lights shining. The reflectors reflected below in the volcanic lagoon. A howl of wild beasts in the dawn. He won't confess. Now to gain time. More time. I cry out. Begging for mercy. No, there's no mercy. Back to the water. That same night a boy stripped to his shorts. Like one of those frightened puppies. Drink it up, said Colonel Somoza Debayle to me. Isn't it your own blood? It won't hurt you. I began to confess lies, my voice faltering, the stenographers getting it down on paper with their swift pencils. Between one torture and the next one he'd see a movie. They put me in a cell called the Tiny One opposite the electric plant of the presidential mansion. At its highest part the cell is 3.5 feet high, at its lowest part it touches the floor. From there I saw the tortures. They were from midnight to 2 every night. Major Morales squeezed my balls. They took me to the garden, where I'd seen Narvaez in the panther's cage in pajamas and barefoot and other men in the lion's cage. Now Narvaez was in with the lions and Julio Velasquez in the panther's cage. It happened next to the pool, next to the cabanas of the presidential pool. From my house we could hear the roaring at dawn. When they were hungry. Each dawn. Somoza's zoo. At that time we didn't know the prisoners were in with the animals. The Black Panther had been a gift from Castillo Armas, which was not very soothing, you might say. Somoza fat and all decorated like a Christmas tree. The seminary students used to take a walk to Akawalinksa to see the footprints. And so you went underground and died in the urban guerrilla fighting. All life unites and does not divide, it integrates, for that you gave your life, you on the 5th planet of a medium-sized star of the Milky Way. Great feelings of love at the risk of looking ridiculous, Che had said. Every living substance unites. What is fecundation really? Every living substance, fusion with what is different, unification with the opposite. Although death is as ancient as the cosmos, the antiprotons fight the protons, the antineutrons fight the neutrons, antimatter fights matter. And now with bazookas they try to stop history. Verily, verily I say unto you, the revolution is in the midst of you. It's suicidal not to try it, you used to tell your friends in the India coffee house. In the midst of the general tendency to disintegration there is an inverse tendency to union. To love. Our poor aqueous systems clamor for union, a solution based on water and salts, energy in the form of carbohydrates. An inverse tendency which is the revolution. That's why Lionel Rugema, a 20-year-old poet, became an urban guerrilla fighter. Ex-seminarist, Marxist, in the India coffee house you used to say that the revolution is communion with the species. Announce that the kingdom of God is at hand. As a male sperm cell penetrates the female ovum. That's why you fought all evening in that house. After all, God is also city, God as city. The city of the definitive meeting of each man with all men, the city of identity and consummated community, the city of communion. For the sake of that city you became an urban guerrilla fighter. It is also like a mustard seed. The revolution is also like a cell that splits in two, and each one of those two becomes two others, etc., and like a male embryo that goes on growing. The transformation of monkey into man, of course. Since the first carved flint. Texaco, Standard Oil. The monopolies will be extinguished like the dinosaurs of the Jurassic Age. And Cuba used to have 25,000 whorehouses or 27,000, I don't remember. Revolution means to change reality. Let us, Lionel Rugema, organize hopes. Possibilities that can't be dreamed up by computers. To make real the kingdom of God. It is a law established by nature that no molecule can permanently retain more energy than the others. The economy of the future will be to make life more beautiful. If we knew nothing of the metamorphosis of the insects. A new society, a new heaven and a new earth, also the production of free time, and with the development of production capacity the development of the inner life, a new man and a new song. That's why you died in the urban fighting, a new man to dream new dreams. And in Cuba words have vanished like bayou, whorehouse, capataz, foreman, criada, maid, chulo, pimp. Also garrote, gambling den, flatera, prostitute, garrotero, money lender. This is almost not a poem. I mean, there are words that young people in Cuba do not know. The Jurassic dinosaurs disappeared and they were the superior beings of the Jurassic Age. The life of each one richer, more beautiful. Evolution comes in leaps, said Mao. Evolution is revolution. Revolution is not illusion. The caterpillar weaves around itself a new home from which it emerges with colored wings with which it flies off to the sky. You, Lionel Rugema, bullet-riddled and carried off to the morgue stained with earth and blood, said La Prensa. You were the light at the end of a tunnel. And why is it expanding? For whom is the universe expanding? The flower becoming bigger every second. 1,000 light years are like a quick kiss, and the opposite, and revolution is a function of evolution itself because /leaps, as Mao says, /evolution has a frightening velocity. From a little stick came light. First came the conquest of fire in the Pleistocene age. Cold night changed into days in the depths of the cave. Some deciphering the sky. The phases of the moon. Science was born in caves. An organization, the mammoth could be hunted only cooperatively. Later on, better than raising sheep was stealing sheep. War could be an industry. To guard the wheat as important as sowing it. War could be productive. And after domesticating animals, man invented a way to domesticate man. Not killing the enemy, making him work. Slavery, the basis of industry and the accumulation of capital, rows of fettered people on the Babylonian seals, as important an invention as the domestication of animals. Afterward, not just enemies, the poor man could be sold. Or the exile. One could go to Egypt to become a slave. The pyramids begin. And if there are slaves, others no longer work. The archaeologists find two kinds of tombs. In the Neolithic village, the tombs are all alike. And consequently the dwellings. The division of classes a product of progress. Yes, but it did not accelerate, it retarded future progress. Progress in Neolithic times was in the production processes and it was made by the producers, but now these the inventors become the lower class. Inventions were labor-saving, plows, tools, sailing ships. The invention of slavery makes inventions superfluous. No more saving of labor, no more inventing of anything. Slavery, then, as the retarder of progress. I know good, decent people who imagine the future as a repetition of the present. She was as skinny as a little frog. They say to her, "But you're so skinny, you look like a little frog." It's because when I didn't get many men they'd punish me and wouldn't feed me. That was awful, they even made me sleep with ugly guys, guys with small pocked faces. And how much did they sell you for? La Piccola sold me for 300 pesos. 76.4 million for the processing units, 90.6 million for installations, 13.9 million for concessions, 46.7 million for contractors. The refinery has to import equipment and raw materials without duty, and to export products also without duty. Let the archbishops tell the people, these are your oppressors. Animals of the same species do not devour one another. And you really thought Christ would come back to earth? That one day there would be joy forever. The city at the end of history where matter will no longer be ephemeral. A new heaven and a new earth. Nothing less. So you probably say that Marxism is utopian. The transformation of the caterpillar into a chrysalis and the chrysalis into a butterfly. In short, nature must be distributed to us by the new man whom we already love. If the history of humanity were 24 hours, let's say private property, classes, division into rich and poor, these would be the last 10 minutes. Injustice / the last 10 minutes. The top layer of earth with Mayan pottery and Goodyear tires. So all the great subconscious is communist. There were almost no arms of war, that is. Militarism does not coincide with the great inventions. Organized war came after the inventions. Agriculture, pottery, weaving, the sail, the great invention of bread. Nor did it contribute to the increase of the species. Each invasion destroyed what had been built, it burned, it razed. Militarism retarded, made man retrace the traced. Science exploited by superstition. Kings and priests at the expense of farmers and artists. Magic as the origin of authority / dictatorship. All this has had to go from the classless society of the past to that of the future. Arms for what? Shouted Fidel to the crowd, in 960 AD, in Santiago de Cuba. Arms for what? We are attending the burial of arms and banking, my friend. They could leave the campesinos on their land, even protect them, in exchange for farm produce, tribute, and the campesinos then produced more than necessary to pay that bribe that was maybe more than what was left for himself, and this created an aristocracy, a class that lived off the campesinos and took from them more than they needed for their own consumption, and so they had a surplus of things to pay for the development of other things for consumption, by the same aristocracy, or commerce, and so there were rich and poor. We enter into the Easter of the Revolution. After the bombardment of words and bombs, the slow sale of lives, hours/months/years, fecundity sabotaged and beauty sabotaged after the terror in the streets filled with radio patrols, the Central Intelligence Agency, ankylostomiasis and equisystemosis, the United Fruit lush as a cedar of Lebanon, the burning of huts, the boot on top of the pregnant belly, and baseball to make the people forget. This is the paschal mystery of the revolution. We shall be reborn together as men and as women. It becomes a chrysalis, and the chrysalis sprouts wings. Evolution taught the species lessons for survival. Union, it was one of the most important. Class divisions and war were not evolutionary lessons. Sowing crops was not invented without cooperation, without the union of a few men, and they didn't invent speech without cooperation, or flocks. Man forgot the ancient lesson with private property and the accumulation of capital, the ancient lesson of survival, the principle of equality that gave such good results. Drinking coffee in the India or the Hotel Santa Cruz, you used to say that the inner revolution and the other are the same. It's because the universe and the heart are one. Or just as there are within the cell the orbits of the solar system. Also saying that all revolutions are a single great revolution. As you were in the seminary, you said that the revolutionary is a militant saint. Also talking of the sanctifying force of the revolutionary. You called the underground, when you entered it, catacombs. And the seminary was also a kind of underground. The harshness of that struggle. There you also looked for a kind of guerrilla warfare. Also not to commit suicide, or said in another way, to die for others. Whoever saves his life will lose it. You knew how bloody the inner revolution is, less moving than under the machine gun bursts high in the mountains with the red sun and Camillo up ahead, Brother Lorenzo 30 years in a convent kitchen. Revolution is at times routine and without glory. Che knew that struggle, too. Condensed milk and rotten cat flesh, and when you were an acolyte in the insane asylum, the madman covered with crap and the mass smelling of shit. And also the humiliation of wearing, in this heat, a black Sadducean cloak. When they walk 2 by 2 to Akawalinksa to see the footprints. He who does not hate his father and his mother and lovely girls. Celibacy, a Sierra Maestra or the Long March. That's why afterward you could preach, India Coffee House, freedom is our death, but with it we give life, or the fear of delivering ourselves up to a sacrificed life. The duty to make the revolution without even hoping to see victory. Che knew that braver struggle farts, vomit, and diarrhea, says the diary. Without glory, shit covered in a hammock, they lent him a pair of pants, but with no water, I stink of shit 3 miles away. I imagine your seminary, monotonously a choir rehearses psalms in a remote Gregorian chant. And a remote John Chrysostom, you who are man, a most gentle animal, you used to read his homily. You shut up in your house the food of 1,000 hungry men, and from the seminary you look, or used to look, at all of Managua, the middle-class center, around it proletarian homes, on this side Akawalinksa, close by the insane asylum with the poet Cortez, Managua, still, between the feudal castle and the lake, and in the center, white, as high as the interest rates of the central bank. A billboard on the highway, enjoy around where the madmen are. Another kind of warfare. Perhaps a worse underground. But you also knew a revisionist gospel, the Bank of the Holy Spirit inside the Vatican, Banco di Santo Espiritu, God's bride a prostitute, the bride prostituted, General Immobiliare, part of the patrimony of the Holy See, or rather General Immobiliare, a branch of the Vatican, and Vittorino Veronese, that's the name of the mama's boy president of Italian Catholic Action, and the Banco di Roma, the church goes to bed with anyone at all. And more than half the bishops in Nicaragua were apostates, and His Most Craven Excellency that night, a sad night, anointed with trembling oil in the stadium, poor old man, Somoza's daughter as Queen of the Army. The gold crown belonged to the Virgin of Candelaria. And Somoza uniting house to house and estate to estate. and the shouts of the harvesters mounting to the ears of the God of the armies. And they said in the Curia, no, not with a signature. With a mortgage. The priests of the Curia, no, not with a signature. With a mortgage. Monsignor Borgia, all in red tassels and phylacteries, presiding over the bishop's conference, and that prick from Nazareth, what's he saying? The apostasy of the Nicaraguan church. Changing it, as many do, to the Corinthians, that he did not negotiate with the message. Changing it, as many do, that money should be the source of money. That is the great sin. Fernando said, don't fuck around. Tinata Salazar doesn't earn 10 pesos a week. Piguelito died because the hospital wouldn't let him in. And then they talk to me about God. Don't be ridiculous. As for Akawalinksa, you felt guilty. Innocent. Those people are innocent. Some of us are mass murderers, others are like the guard who turns his back so as not to see the torturing, and he lights a cigarette. 5 years in the seminary. Seminarist and then Marxist. And God? Well, what about God? Let's make a distinction. There are many gods. The God of John D. Rockefeller. You were looking for communion, communion with the species. After all, to die for others was not an act of scientific analysis but an act of faith. The Paschal Praxis. And Yahweh said, I am not. I shall be. I am the one who shall be, he said. I am Yahweh, a God who waits in the future, who cannot be unless conditions are fulfilled, a God who is not but who will be. For he is love among men, and he is not, he will be. We shall know God when there are no Akawalinkas. And you would ask yourself the big question. What are we doing here on the great ball? He who has 2 robes, let him give one to him who has none. Man as an end in himself. Father Blanchard, O.P., says that the church of the future will have only revolutionaries. A new man, a new time, a new earth. The heart of man and not the structures. To change consciousness without transforming the world, a classless city, the free city where God is everybody, he, God with everybody, Emmanuel, the universal city, the city where God's humanity will be revealed to us. 1,000,000 years without private property and only 7,000 with private property, and rich and poor. And what more? Che insisted on going back to Havana that evening, and the pilot said no because of the bad weather, and Che kept insisting and the pilot said no, bad weather, and the fact was that Che didn't have the money to pay for hotel rooms for himself and his guests, and Che was president of the Bank of Cuba. So human as to approach the best of what is human. Impossible with money or arms to prevent the expansion of the universe. We are beings who will achieve human dignity. It is a priestly struggle, said Father Camillo. And you said, let's sow it. Life. Without expecting any notice in the news or in history. The dough rises. With yeast the dough rises. The dough rises. The great loaf lifts itself. Common ownership of means of production and distribution. The commoner it is, the holier it is, said Saint Gertrude. And Clement of Alexandria, they will not be saved unless they make restitution. Injustice, in the last I.O. minutes, 8 minutes, the widow, the orphan, the poor man, the foreigner. It is a law of nature that there be no division in the same species. If there are 50 people and only 1 bottle of water, there is a fight for it. If there is 1 bottle for each one, there is harmony, so abundance is important. And if they ask you for the moon, Sartre asked Fidel. If they ask me for it, it's because they need it. To make out of each man a man. Let poets be agitators and let lovers be agitators. Stone Age. Bronze Age. Now Age of Love. Man's greatest crime is to prevent men from being men. Only 10 minutes ago, 8 minutes. It's not certain that it's since the world has been a world. A consumptive dying on a sidewalk. This was before the earthquake. He had been a miner in the Neptune Gold Mining Co. at 10 cents an hour, and he said, the silica was so fine it looked like smoke. Sandino used to say, I won't live long. And around Matagalpa, the so-called night blindness, from hunger, as soon as night falls they're sightless, groping in their huts, their pupils dilated, until the next day, at dawn. The most perfect being in the solar system. That's why you went underground, and as you wrote, with no alternative to fighting. Subversion as a moral imperative. And you understood that fighting as meaning not to commit suicide. Anti-historic regimes roaring all around. Julio was the chief of the underground. They'd like to see the evolution of the universe slow down. That's God's honest truth. The rest is publicity and public relations. A merchant who says we're here to serve the customer. Easier a camel through a needle's eye than development with the Inter-American Development Bank. Apes of the darkness of this world, Paul to the Ephesians, businessmen, executives more pernicious than typhus, good women worse than gangrene, minority, microbes in the mystic body create antibodies. A system that forbids us to love, there might even be the danger of a chilling of the planet. Or as the boys say now, it's absolutely hopeless. You used to come in old clothes. Laughing you used to come to the La Prensa office with your poems. Joking with beauty just as you did when as a kid you squatted down to see the teacher's panties. Writing was as simple as taking a bus. Verses to the rose are not middle class and roses aren't middle class either. The revolution will grow them, too. It's really about distributing roses and poetry. And poetry was also going in a barge along the psyche of the barge with the jukebox and seeing the water the color of a Schaller cola bottle. The ooze on the wetlands, strips of old quilts. A bridge that the tyrant inaugurated in the movie house by cutting a ribbon. A girl washing, breasts seen from far away, coffee color people, or the girl that always goes along the opposite sidewalk and doesn't nod but she goes into the poem that Pablo Antonio will publish in La Prensa. Lies and more lies on the teletype are battle on the field of language. The ugly they make beautiful and the beautiful ugly. Truth is a lie and good is evil. Literature, as effective as guns, said Mao. They are advances in the common language, the language of liberation, the language, you know, that makes Latin America one and its revolution one. The explorer bee with dance and song before the beehive shows in which direction and how far away the flowers are, a function of the poet in the community. Guns, according to Mao. You wanted poems for the truck driver, in the India, the little Santa Cruz hotel, for the bootblacks, but shall we do better to wait for others to free us? The hand of the love epigrams turned on a light. Those farewells are for keeps, Julio had said. Bastards. You later saw the house in the friction quarter full of smoke and with holes blown out by Sherman tanks. You noted down, Sherman, Browning, M3, M1 to include this in the poem, where he had fired all alone against hundreds of guards, tanks, planes, security agents, enlisted men, supply trucks, firing all alone from the balcony. FFE fired all afternoon. Steady shooting on both sides. And the tank with its cannon. The light planes. Helicopters. And they thought there were a lot of them, and it was just one guy, all alone. The radio interrupted the news for a soap ad. With no alternative to death. You went underground, or as you said, you entered the catacombs. Nights when all lights are suspect, nights sleeping fully dressed on the floor of an empty house with the M3 at your side, tiptoeing to peer behind the blinds with cocked pistol. You see ghosts everywhere, said Julio, and it's only a couple making love in a car. Julio also said, you think I'll let myself be taken alive by those sons of bitches? Sometimes maybe women guerrilla fighters listening to rock on the radio. It was after the assault on the Bank of America. Salim Shiabal, Silvio, Casimiro, Julio, they had fallen. Behind the clandestine blinds you could see the bootblack and ice cream vendor, the lady that peddles chitlins. Chitlins. The dried tripe peddler, they're going to have a Shakespeare reading, a man selling greens, shouting greens. A man selling firewood, a man selling coal. Other poets get drunk or go whoring. You died. Death to give life. They say you wanted to form a group of guerrilla poets to show that intellectuals can throw their weight around. Target shooting because we had to kill the hunger that's killing us, that's what you said. And then one day in La Prensa an 8-column headline: Sandino nest destroyed with machine gun and cannon fire. There were 3 of you. 18, 19, and 20 years old. You were the oldest. Security agents reached the sky blue house opposite the East Cemetery. Ephraim's mama shouted, "The guards!" The first volley and 2 guards fall. More patrols, and more bursts of guerrilla machine guns and more guards fall. Garand rifle fire. Reinforcements begin to arrive. Jeeps, buses from transit headquarters, big jeeps from the combat battalion, official cars, trucks from security, more guards with rifles or machine guns, hundreds of spectators watching the fighting like at the movies. A light plane was flying over the house, higher up a helicopter. The sound of the bullets against the walls of the house inside. Cheers for Sandino. At 4 a tank arrives firing cannon shots. A cloud of dust over the house. When the tank would fire, something began to smoke. The cannon of the tank was also smoking. More shooting, and nobody knows how many there are inside or what weapons they have. Cheers for Julio Buitrago. The guards bring hand grenades, the boxes set down with great care. Photos, turn to P12, to P18. From the combat battalion, official cars, trucks. Answers again. Other shots from inside. Another cannon shot from the tank. The bullets from the plane against the zinc roof. The bullets scattering the tree leaves. Ambulances wailing like wounded animals. Soldiers behind lead-colored jeeps, khaki-colored jeeps firing at the windows. The corner house newly painted sky blue, firing and shouting orders to surrender. New reinforcements along West Cemetery. Ave and the boys shouted, "A free country or death." The shots striking against the Acapulco barber shop, against the Esso station, against the little market. A kid was picking almonds in a nearby tree and he observed the whole battle from up in the tree. The guards firing and firing from behind their jeeps and the guns jerking with each shot, and the crowd not knowing who's inside, answering the army's fire. The guy in the gas station falls shot in the foot. He was watching from behind a post with his legs spread. The guards now filling the streets. The corner's guards still several blocks away, some crawling toward the house with hand grenades. A priest insults them. Rifle thuds. They've arrested Father Mejia. La Prensa goes on. See photograph. The kids shouted "son of a prick" at the guards and they went after them with fixed bayonets. Others shouted behind them and they turned around. And you too were a kid who played ball, who played jacks on street corners and pitched pennies on the bricks of the park paths, always the lucky one. Another cannon shot and more shots from inside. Yours was the first stage, destruction, which, you used to say, always has a touch of grief. Shots sound from inside, more Garand rifle shots against the house. The plane passes over again. The rat-a-tat of the machine guns with no alternative to death near your little park where, as a kid, you played ball and jacks, and where the Firelake circus of your childhood raised its tent, a tent all patched, and where the old market women would go and crap in the bushes. Your childhood neighborhood, everybody listening to soaps and anti-communists, the poor things, after so many years of radio, years and years of the daily news. The guards fall back. A silence, and then the great explosion. Another. And another. They were shoving people off the streets and a new cannon boom. A little girl of 3 to the reporter: "I was scared, real scared of the pistol when it went bang bang." Another volley from the tank of the armored battalion with scarcely an answer from inside. The articles and the photographs are there. The chanson de geste was a newspaper gone with the wind. The house now all riddled with gunshot and cannon shot. Sporadic gunfire now. Shots from inside, feeble, crack, crack, crack. Silence. Another grenade and a guard shouts, "Lay down your arms, you're surrounded." It was then, they say, that you shouted, "Let your mother lay down," and now there were thousands of spectators watching the movie. People, heaps of people, the people for whom they were dying. The plane got it splashed the little house from top to bottom. Chola Paz's little kids ran bare ass into the street, and the other woman who said she thought they were firecrackers but she saw the guard. She and the kids went into the bathroom, sing national anthem before dying. We were inside the bathroom, but even in there we could hear when the boys began to sing the national anthem. I report this from an old newspaper gone with the wind. Not until dusk did the guards occupy the house. A patrol entered the house in ruins. A silence of 5 minutes. A burst of machine gun fire and then total silence. An officer with a machine gun came out and gave the ceasefire order. "All 3 of them are dead," he shouted. A backed-up truck and 3 corpses tossed into the truck, black shoes and a pair of dirt-colored arms, the body of a long-haired blue-jeaned red-shirt boy and the other one red-chested, what the reporter saw. The Acapulco barbershop was left with its mirrors smashed. Rake arms. The Army bulletin, 3 M3 machine guns, 3 .45 pistols. And a 9mm caliber pistol. That's what the guerrilla fighters had. The hundreds of guards began to wrest arms. Demolished doors, twisted iron, zinc roof riddled by the plane, the walls with great gaps, blood in the patio, a blood-stained mattress in the bathroom, shreds of shirts, underwear, handkerchiefs soaked in blood, blood in the kitchen, beans on the floor, pot lids with great smears of blood in the patio, the house full of smoke. Like those animals that die after intercourse. A photograph of a mother in mourning leaving the morgue. They had to die for the sake of the chitlin peddler, chitlins, for the sake of the woman peddling dried tripe, another form of life now lifeless. Nicaragua is a nice deal, says the Oil and Gas Journal, for the sake of the peddler of cold fruit juice and the crackling peddler, your death, or rather your resurrection, for the sake of the consumptive lying under the tree and the whores in the whorehouses and the pretty girl that used to go by on the opposite sidewalk, always the opposite. 1. The rhythm of the stars is the same as that of the cells. And for the sake of the dusty soap opera neighborhoods with walls on which a kid is scratching asshole cunt prick. Now from the seminary you can see another Managua, a few seconds and all the pride was shit upon, shells of houses like rotten scorched eggs, smoldering walls, windows like eye sockets. Managua surrounded by a huge concentration camp, barbed wire, its decomposing body breaking into bits, buzzards over the city bank. Another Managua, block after block after block, leveled flat. Behold, I make all things new, floors stuck together like playing cards above the rubble of a nightclub, the remains of a sign. Gaiety, a huge television ad above other ruins. Here were the showcases filled with toys, a smell like a dead rat. Here's where Sears used to be, movie houses with bellies burst open, demolished the great hospital that rejected Pidgeotto. This is the Avenue of the Army. No, then what was its name? 1. A sign, the Coliseum. Could it have been a restaurant? The blood bank that bought the blood of the poor plasmapheresis at a good price. The stadium, the Somoza Stadium it was called, once full of fanatic fans, the one where a girl was anointed that night as Queen of the Army. What an army! The mansions of the rich with their nativity scenes in the living room, the country club where the Bayesian cows used to drink scotch, the office buildings went down in 30 seconds. Announce it in the palaces of Assur, tell it in the palaces of Egypt. The address book now useless and the telephone directory. The Bank of America skyscraper was a torch in the night. Pepsi Cola was flat on the ground. The Grand Hotel as if bombarded by Sherman tanks. The Air Force prison without walls or prisoners or guards. The American embassy on its knees. The Luis Somoza statue hollow toppled to the ground, a stump like one more corpse dug up from the ruins. Up there, the hill, now uninhabitable, security lurching on Tezcapa Lagoon. The torture chambers slithered toward the lagoon. The great tower rolled to the waters of the lagoon. With one slice missing, the wedding cake of the presidential palace, Somoza's messages on the ground, the wind ruffling them, with fragments of China, the one that was so often featured in Novedades. In the distance the combat battalion barracks raised and the armored battalion, tanks crushed beneath the concrete, and Novedades was pulverized. That Don Hughes fled like a bat smoked out of his hiding place, without organizing his chain of casinos. Something more than an adaptation movement of terrestrial layers. On the sidewalk, the 5th floor of the communications building, it was the telephonic censorship one, a geological midwife or whatever you want to call it. That night the Sandinistas went free, the courthouse tilting and shattered, the banks dynamited, downfallen all the religious schools. They were only for the rich, the temples, all of them. There they celebrated false rites, liturgies that turn God's stomach a Christmas Eve without stuffed turkeys. And there are no streets now. The horrible starlit night, see the La Prensa account 3 months later, the dead carried on planks, on doors. Lightless, foodless, waterless Managua, all a great Akawalinksa, like the night when there was no room for them in the inn. All Bethlehem celebrating its Christmas Eve supper. The sewers erupted, chaos, blood, pillage. Their idea of communism, those who never used to pray prayed, the Christians didn't have time a home delivery of the Last Judgment, what we thought could be seen only somewhere else or on TV. There was no room in the morgue, the National Guard looting like an army of occupation with the groans of the wounded and the wails of the ambulances. But can there be a catastrophe in a city if Yahweh didn't order it? The arms exploded like Roman candles, the house of Pelas lit up like a Christmas tree. The only banks now are blood banks, the stars are shining up above. The roofs collapsed with all their ads. This was Roosevelt Avenue. You can still see ITT Kodak. A Santa Claus among the rubble. All squashed, the cars more cherished than the children, eyes to see not and ears to hear not, the twisted letters a new year / a new car. A mass of tiles, rules, mud and bricks, a Christmas wreath still hanging on what was once a store at 12:27 a.m. All the Christmas carols and commercials were silenced, bricks, adobe, twisted iron, all the streets lost, all the familiar routes blackened, ruins, avenues of glass, concrete, desks and building blocks strewn about, a smell of dead rat everywhere, strong boxes overturned, a sign, the Barber of Seville, just when the Christmas sales were so good in the luxury shops over which the bulldozer is now passing purchase. Mutilated mannequins, ballet slippers, bidets, everything dragged off by the tractors, television sets, freezers, washing machines. You ordered your prophets not to prophesy. The homeowners lost all their homes, all equal now. The subsoil released its energy, none of her lovers comforts her, alas, the beloved city, the city of private property. Your prophets announced for you falseness and stupidities. Into the lake they go on, throwing bricks, TV sets, safes, the ES charred, smashed furniture, cars, all the things that the workers made, flower pots, rugs, suits, juice squeezers, but they were sold to them as though they belonged to somebody else. Everything that the tractor goes on carrying away, record players, toys nobody could afford, cash registers, caviar cribs, the breathtaking velocity of evolution. This is a terrestrial prelude of revolution. The story of the farmer who took his little daughter to see the center of town. Look, child, so you'll never believe in these things. For Pharaoh and his technicians they were only economic setbacks. And they still tell us not to prophesy. We're under martial law, don't prophesy. And there'll be still more horrors to come. Hours earlier some young men had begun a fast in the cathedral, placards, food for the people of Akawalinksa, and a Christmas Eve without political prisoners. Two ways of looking at a plague, the point of view of Egypt and that of the Hebrews. Ruins, ruins, ruins without one electric light in all those ruins, the huge Christmas tree still in Republic Square. It's sad to think we'll never see Bolivar Avenue again, the black ruins in the moonlight. I got to know a place here called Volga Delights. This was my city where I'd go in the afternoon hand in hand with Adelita, avoiding the center of town through pink side streets where there were always buses parked and we would pass by groups of drivers. Paris Bar, Fatima boarding house, India coffee house. The black ruins and the intermittent explosions of the demolition in the dark. Here there was a corner called the Little Tree. Streets where they sold fried pork, jerked beef, dried tripe. The Five Sisters was a friendly bar with a dirt floor and good free lunch, a long time ago, and there were neighborhood directions like, from Kamena's 3 blocks toward the lake and then 1 block up, she made fireworks La Kamena and she dressed like a man and had a mustache. The poor man's Mandarin was a railroad worker's bar. In charcoal on a board wall, we've gone to Manuela Gonzalez's. Here there used to be whorehouses, board stones, earth whorehouses, home stores, inexpensive board and room, meat tamales for sale, all alike stones from the volcanic strata of those footprints of Akawalinksa with which Managua was built, the moon behind the wire fences and the explosions. Bolivar Ave, where I saw her for the first time, many years ago, dressed in yellow, rumbles from the buildings that they're dynamiting. We shall weep not for this rubble but for mankind. Yet death is balm with the body and it dies with it. Death is the death of the individual, a touch of grief to be reborn. You must die, you loved the future and you died for it. You accepted this touch before these people, brother, your death is dead. Pitiless midwife. At the Chevron gas station a man was stroking his daughter's face as if to lull her to sleep. Like everything that cannot die, you then went on to live in another form. Blessed be those with liberating grief. Remains. The people went off in trucks with their stuff, their junk the people took to the highways. The people never dies. They left in the midst of tears, but I make them come back happy. And the symbolism of these tents. Conditions propitious, for what? Question mark. With the earthquake capitalism sank deeper into capitalism. Some of the guards had a lot of fun getting people to run after the food trucks and from time to time tossing out a few cans. Means of production not to be in the hands of a few bastards. Are they going to halt the march toward the promised society? One class I shall save and another class I shall destroy. Oracle of Yahweh. Nobody knows when it will come into being, said Lenin, paradise. The people are untouched, they clean up the rubble and transform the gruesome city. The rebuilders of the city working just for food rations go late at night to the outskirts to sleep, and a few hours later they regroup in squads and march off to the rubble. A boy of 15 just for food, mind you, and the marquee of the movie house fell on top of him. But the people are immortal. They come smiling out of the morgue. The chewing gum sellers, the paper boys, the car watchers, junkmen, knife grinders are everywhere. They are the foundation. If they shake, the skyscrapers fall. Trains and trucks go out loaded with cotton pickers. The huge gleaming granaries are empty, filled with hunger. Or samosa rice, their laughter in the warehouse facing the bay and throughout the countryside. Your barge goes along the Saikia again with piles of beer crates full or empty. And our crime is to announce a paradise. Monopolies are only since the Neolithic age. The kingdom of God is at hand, the city of communion, brothers. Only the dead are reborn. Once more there are more footprints, the pilgrimage has not ended. At midnight a poor woman gave birth to a baby boy in an open field, and that is hope. God has said, behold, I make all things new, and that is reconstruction. 1973 DDW. Trip to New York. That afternoon I thought I was still on my Solentiname Island instead of peering out a plane window over New York Harbor. Ships down below, barely moving, my plane just as slow. The rush hour traffic jam at Kennedy Airport forced us to circle over New York for an hour. What miracle has put me above Manhattan this late afternoon, circling skyscrapers reddened like the clouds? From the seat beside me, vacant, I picked up a New Yorker this week. Washington awoke from its Watergate stupor. Senator Fulbright fears they may fall into a totalitarian system. Ladies and gentlemen, Kennedy Airport is still jammed up. As I press against the window bent over the water of New York Harbor, the plane, as if anchored to a cloud, doesn't move. Ad for an island swimming pool, tennis cottages, water sports. The Island Company Limited, 375 Park Avenue. Cartoon of a fat man with a newspaper saying to his wife, all these years of struggling and the Times is still calling me a reputed mafia leader. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now been picked up by radar and we're heading straight for Kennedy Airport on automatic landing. Factories, trains, little suburban houses all alike, matchbox cars, and finally on the runway. Along with 100 more planes like sharks. Waiting for me was young, bearded Gerard, who miraculously brought me to New York and tells me to call him Tony. We're riding in his poor old car toward New York, rivers of cars. He invited me to a benefit for the Managua victims, but he needed someone to pay the fare, he says. He finally got it. God takes care of everything. He works with orphans, drug addicts, poor Puerto Ricans, and while he was in a ghetto, he got the idea of a benefit for Managua. He needed a hall, was turned down at Columbia. Looking up at the sky he saw the Episcopal Cathedral of St. John the Divine, walked in and the bishop said to him, why not? New York prisoners gave pictures they painted. North American Indians also gave woven things and ceramics. More rivers of cars, trains, trucks, superhighways all crisscrossing. He's a Catholic, he tells me, and also a Zen. He'd worked before at St. Patrick's Cathedral. He couldn't stay on there, its present cardinal worse than Spellman. Along the highway, messages from gas stations, drive-ins, motels, a car graveyard, melancholy in the twilight. Some hippies have camped in the Gethsemane monastery, he says. Guys with girls too, the abbot allowed it. In the United States monasteries are getting emptier and emptier. Young people prefer small communes. I tell him that Merton used to tell me those orders would disappear and only small communes would be left. The sky smog and adds rectangular hulks among the exhaust fumes, and most all the contemplatives, Tony says, have a mentality that's bourgeois middle class, indifferent to the war issue. and to the revolution. Liquor's drugstore. You think New York's changed a lot? I was here 23 years ago. I say, it's just the same. The rows of red and green traffic lights and the lights of the taxis and the buses. Madison Avenue, says Tony. And laughing. It's funny, echo Beto Cardenal on Madison Avenue. And I look at the deep canyon, the sunken gorge of buildings where the hidden persuaders hide behind their windows selling automobiles of true happiness, canned relief, for 30 carat, the Coca-Cola company. We cut through the canyon of windows and trillions of dollars. For centuries they didn't eat meat, now that many of us are vegetarians they're eating meat, he says. From a street corner, the Empire State, just its bottom floors. At the heart of imperialism. Famous monks come to lecture on asceticism and they stay at deluxe hotels. And now on the west side. Cafeteria, delicatessen, dry cleaning. We arrive at Napoleon's apartment, 50th and 10th Avenue. Along the sidewalk, blue-jeaned and blue-eyed teenagers clustered around bicycles, or sitting on the steps. The doorbell doesn't work, but Napoleon and Jackie were expecting us. Napoleon Chow of Chinese and Nicaraguan ancestry, and Jackie is an anthropologist, a specialist on Turkey. The little apartment monastic, but with Persian tapestries. I call Laughlin at his home in Connecticut. Surprised, what the devil am I doing in New York? He laughs, clear from Connecticut. He'll come in on Saturday so we can see each other at his place in the village. Napoleon and Jackie do yoga. On many days they fast completely, other days they cook very well, eating Chinese, Turkish, Nicaraguan food, food as joy, sacrament. There is an Angora cat that shits in the toilet just like people. Tuesday evening, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, 2th Street, opened its bronze doors for the exhibition. I read my Oraculo sobre Managua, the earthquake part, among prisoners' paintings and Indian ceramics. A full-bearded rabbi prays, our guilt in such tragedies. And the dean of the cathedral, our system, Lord, which aggravates those catastrophes. And I'm thinking, the Somoza's a 40-year-long earthquake. Benedictine brother David. And Lord, it is in New York of all places where you gather us from different countries and religions to pray for Managua, and to meditate on how much ought to be destroyed here. Dorothy Day was ill so she couldn't come. Maria Jose and Clemencia, two beautiful Nicaraguan girls, I met their father, ask me how those streets were left. I met him once that April night we were on our way to storm the presidential palace, Chima. He was tortured and murdered. I just tell them, I met your father. In the choir loft, slides, radiant colors, of the debris. Corita, ex-sister Corita, gave 6 paintings to help Managua. Daniel Berrigan is expecting me tomorrow. Central Park, uptown, and I tell myself, that's where the swans are. I remember my Liana, and the swans. She got married. The swans must still be there. Once, one hungry day, Louis trying to catch a swan. Once again I saw people talking to themselves in the streets, the lonely crowd. With Napoleon and Jackie in Times Square, nothing to see, and along 48th Street among the titillating porn movies. An empty store, 2 policemen taking notes, its window front shattered, and no one looking, right on Broadway. With Daniel Berrigan at the Thomas Merton Center. Daniel, Dan, in blue jeans and sandals like me, his hair a street kid's hair after a fight, and the same smile he flashed in the pictures as he was arrested by the FBI, jubilant between the glum FBI agents. He'd read my psalms in prison. Also there, Jim Forrest, a pacifist, with a big mustache, younger than I thought. He wrote to me once. He told me that Merton gave him a crucifix that I made in Gethsemane. He's in from Washington, from a protest march from the Watergate building to the Justice Department. And Berrigan sitting on a desk, his lean face propped on one knee, and his thin hair in his face. Barely recovered from jail, they tell me. And a girl. The tortures that aren't supposed to take place in the United States. This is a group of contemplatives and resistors, says Berrigan. Meeting one night in a Harlem convent, they got the idea of establishing this Merton Center. They study the mysticism of different religions including the American Indians. Merton suffered horrors in the monastery, says Dan, and all of us know it. And Jim reminds us about when he was forbidden to write against nuclear warfare because it wasn't a monastic theme. Dan, he told me he wouldn't ever become a monk again, but being one already, he'd go on being one. He was going to go to Solentiname after Asia, wasn't he? Jim asks. And Dan, and are you sure he isn't there? And Dan also. Contemplation, it's an awful drug we have here. They meditate. Without thinking at all about the war. Without thinking at all about the war. You can't be with God and be neutral. True contemplation is resistance. And poetry, gazing at the clouds, is resistance, I found out in jail. I tell him he ought to go to Cuba. He says he's still on probation. I also tell him, in Latin America we're integrating Christianity with Marxism. And he, I know. But not here. Here it's Christianity with Buddhism. Jim, by now aren't we all Buddhists? Isn't there any Buddhism in Latin America? No. Tomorrow, at the Merton Center, they're celebrating the wedding of his brother, Philip, the other priest, and ex-nun Elizabeth McAllister, and we're invited. Philip splashed blood on the draft files in Maryland, and Philip and Daniel burned the files in Catonsville with homemade napalm, a soap powder gasoline mixture, and Jim also napalmed the files in Milwaukee, and they just got out of jail. They say Merton once considered such an action. There's a girl fasting because of the Cambodia bombing. On the wall a Berrigan poem about Vietnam on big sheets of paper put together like a mural. When I leave, Dan gives me a fat loaf of bread, a great round loaf of whole wheat bread, baked there. To the movies with Napoleon and Jackie for a Cuban film, Memories of Underdevelopment. They don't idealize the revolution, a documentary segment, a writer's congress, and I believe I saw O.K. Dalton in the documentary Fidel delivering a speech, and part of our audience applauds Fidel. A crowd of people on the sidewalk arriving in evening clothes, the opera. Tony's aristocratic Italian grandfather left him a villa on the outskirts of Rome. He's probably going to give it to someone. He doesn't want to own property. And Tony said, Holy Communion. With burning eyes, communion is my greatest union with people each day. For me, communion is the most revolutionary thing in the world. Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAllister accused by the FBI of plotting to kidnap Kissinger. Their wedding celebration is at the Merton Center. Contemplatives and radicals, pacifists, many of them ex-prisoners, Christian anarchists and Christian Buddhists, and, at this party, a Eucharist with protest songs sitting on the floor after the gospel. Jim and Dan talk, and a young lady who's just poured blood on Nixon's dining table and smeared the dining room walls with blood, on a tourist tour of the White House. The press never reported it. She is pregnant, awaiting trial and maybe years in jail. Dan Berrigan consecrates a loaf of bread like the one he gave me and little glasses of wine. The broken bread passes from hand to hand, and the wine. Then a collection. For the poor Watergate defendants, enemies and brothers of ours. Back to the party. Dan says, no more religion. Gallons of California white wine and rose on one table, raisin pudding, apple pie, cheese, on another table. A very long-haired blond young man, Michael Cullen, greets me. He used to read my psalms in prison, he says, and I've read about him. He hands me a pamphlet he's giving out. If Mike Cullen is deported, he was born on a farm in the south of Ireland. He came at age IO, not to make money. He studied at a seminary. He got married, sold insurance, but he was troubled by the rat-infested apartments and the blood gushing in Indochina. He burned his draft card. Along with Jim, he burned the draft files in Milwaukee, the cards marked IA to burn bodies in Asia. Now they want to deport him. He believes they'll deport him, he says sadly. Someone passing by stuffs some money in his pocket and tells him keep going, and he smiles. Sadly, he tells me, the American dream has become a nightmare. All the TV cameras on Philip and his wife. I believe in the revolution, he says. My contribution is nonviolent. Blue-eyed Phil, Fusky like a football player. The Gary Cooper of the church. Elizabeth Sweet, she says they've married to help each other in the struggle and they'll create a commune to help others carry on the struggle. Dan with his radiant smile and his Zen peace. Leaving the Doubleday bookstore, on 5th Avenue, a few men and women in white tunics dancing on the sidewalk, and the young men with shaved heads, in white, look like Trappist novices, in a shop window, mink. A Persian lamb leather jacket. A brooch of diamonds and rubies. A young fellow with a campaign button on his chest, impeach Nixon. Plastic women. I cross the street in fear, walk don't walk, in red. The clerks in the stores almost all Cubans, and it seems to me that I'm hearing talk by revolutionaries. The sky filthy. Police sirens. Old women talking to themselves. Coronel was telling about that French Dominican here, who told him, "Since I came 3 months ago I haven't been able to say prayers." Museum of Modern Art. No time to stop in. And what for? Frank O'Hara used to work here. He wrote his poetry on his lunch hour sandwiches and Coca-Cola. We once wrote to each other. Now I've bought his lunch poems, $1.50, at Brentano's, and the cars remind me of his death run over in New York, on his lunch hour. Walk don't walk. Dorothy Day expects me at the Catholic Worker, says Tony. On the telephone, she remembered she'd once written to me. A paperback bookstore on 5th Avenue. Many books about the Indians. Pawnee. Sioux. Hopi. The Hopi, anarchists and pacifists for 2,000 years, Gandhians having never declared war or signed a treaty, not even with the USA, and now I'm on my way to a noon meeting with Kenneth Arnold, my editor for the English Homenaje a los Indios Americanos. Black Elk's autobiography is also here. Once he came to New York with Buffalo Bill. Sky-high houses, lights made from the power of thunder. He says that here he was like a man who'd never had a vision. Red Fox also with Buffalo Bill. He loved the Indians, he says, he defended them in Washington. Time for me to meet Kenneth. He's in from Baltimore. We plan to meet at the Gotham Book Mart. I have spoken, I've got a copy. With Seattle's speech. Seattle, wrapped in his blanket like a toga, with his well-known voice, loud and clear for half a mile, among the tree stumps in a clearing, my words are like the stars that never change. Whatever Seattle says, the great chief in Washington can rely on, like the return of the sun or the seasons. Outside it's raining, a rain with no smell, and it's almost lunchtime, no smoking, and when the last one of my people has died and they speak of my tribe like a story from the past. Whisper of tires on rainy streets, neon reflections on gleaming wet asphalt. And your children's children think themselves alone in the field, the store, the shop. They will not be alone. When the streets of your cities are silent and you think them empty, they will be filled with the spirits of the dead. Dead, did I say? There is no death. Only a change of world. I leave with books for more homages to the American Indians, and I head for the Gotham Book Mart 3 blocks away, and there is Kenneth. He's young, bearded. Also there, silver-haired Miss Steeloff, the famous owner of this bookstore. And I was here once at a party for Edith Sitwell. Miss Steeloff invited Coronel and me, and we brought Memph Hammer. And Auden was there, and Tennessee Williams, Marianne Moore, Spender. Kenneth brought the cover for Homage to the American Indians. And we go half a block to a Chinese restaurant, and the lunch was chow mein, but first 2 ice-cold beers. This abundance of books about Indians, he says, goes back a year or 2. Indian things have become fashionable. He also has a poem about Indians, or rather about Buffalo Bill, his great-great-uncle. Yes, the brother of his great-grandfather was Colonel William Frederick Cody, Buffalo Bill. Tony comes by for me, and he apologizes for the car. His fell apart. This luxury car belongs to his dad. Ashamed, we're invited to lunch by Brother David's mother, with Napoleon and Jackie. An apartment in an elegant section of 5th Avenue. She's an Austrian baroness, but she works as a store clerk. She gave away her money. A girl has brought me a present, a Watergate poster, a mugshot of Nixon labeled Wanted. Brother David says to me, what would you say to the abbots about the monasteries in the United States? I laugh. Seriously. If the abbots all asked for your advice, they wouldn't take it? But what would you tell them? That they should become communists. A girl, why society first instead of the heart? What's inside comes first. I tell her, we are social beings. Social change is not outside us. The lunch, yogurt with strawberries, a loaf of dark bread and another even darker, milk, blue grapes, red apples, yellow bananas, honey, the most delicious honey I've ever tasted in my life. No liquor at this lunch. I'm the only smoker, the air is polluted enough without inhaling more smoke. Brother David talks with a small string of rosary beads in his hand. I ask him, can you ever integrate Buddhism with Marxism? Through Christianity. You have integrated Christianity and Marxism, and we hear Christianity and Buddhism. Tony leaves us to call on his orphans. 12th Street. Joaquin's apartment was around here. In that house, I'm almost sure. A seller of old books in the village, in love with my shirt, my cotton peasant shirt from Nicaragua. He asks me who invented it. A gold sign, money. Pawnbroker. I ask for Charles St. A well-dressed man on a bench, don't know, he says. Could I spare $1? He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Para was in Chile. On every television screen, Dean testifying against Nixon. Washington Square, Rock in the Park amps, crazy electronic music, frenzied announcers, thousands of long hairs howling with the band, black men, blondes, black women with the band, barefoot, bearded, wearing beads or rags, howling with the band, stomping on the grass or stretched out, smoking, necking, drinking canned beer. A group of lesbians shouting. Beyond them with a banner, Gay Liberation, passive before the Methodist, Bible in hand, preaching to them with a choir of wooden-faced ladies in robes down to their ankles. Crossing the street, 2 faggots with their tongues are licking a single cone. The studio of Armando Morales, the Fuse, in the Bowery, the neighborhood of the beggars and the Catholic worker. It's a storeroom. Without a bath, you bathe in the sink with a sponge over an edition of the Times to keep the floor dry. With California wine, we recall pre-earthquake Managua facing the Fuse's canvases, which the gallery is selling for $10,000. The ashtrays, sardine cans, the kind that open with a key, the lids rolled halfway back, and piles of those ashtrays. He explains to me, the gallery sets the price, and those are the stocks of a painter. A buyer of Morales invests in him as in General Motors. If there's a rise in the price, the stocks, they'll invest more in him. And if the selling stops, the gallery still couldn't cut prices. Even if the Fuse is starving to death, the price cut would create a panic among the investors in Morales' intricate colors and mysterious nudes. He paints his colors, then covers the whole canvas with black. Then he shaves it, with a razor blade, scraping off the black, and he repaints all the colors over the scraping. Now I finally know how to paint, he says. I can paint anything I want. What's hard is to know what to paint. We remember Los Cinco Hermanos, that barroom in Managua. We remember some super muses that we more or less loved. And the time we found we were on the police list of homosexuals, he for being a painter, and I a poet. And he remembers that whorehouse La Hortensia, and I tell him it wasn't where he says, it was somewhere else. And it's not there anymore because later they built the Church of the Redeemer there. The Fuse laughs, and I was already a priest saying mass there until my superior stopped me for my anti-Somoza preaching. The Fuse laughs even louder, and besides, there isn't even a Redeemer now. It collapsed in the earthquake. He can't give pictures for the earthquake benefit. His painting belongs to the gallery. On every television, Dean kept on testifying against Nixon. Laughlin is a door-high man, and, as I already knew through Merton, brimming with love. After we're inside, he asks his wife about Nicanor's wine. Where's the wine Nicanor left? He takes out of the refrigerator the Portuguese white wine, Saint what's his name, that Nicanor left the last time he was here. We're holding our glasses, about to drink, when Laughlin lifts his toward heaven like an offertory. To Tom, I'm sure he'll be enjoying this party wherever he is. And he's here. Nicanor Parra's wine is delicious. It's a curious thing, says Laughlin, after his death you saw that each friend of his believed he was Merton's closest friend. After a pause and a sip of wine, and each one really was. He chats with Napoleon Chow about China and with Jackie about Turkey. He gives us a few of the latest books from New Directions. We've quickly signed the contract for my book and Cuba. More wine. Margaret Randall seems to be happy in Cuba, that's great. He feels very friendly toward her, although he doesn't know her. Then I mention that Laughlin's a good poet, I've translated him, and he says no. Pound told him he wasn't. He slashed through his poems with his famous pencil. He told him, do something useful, and he became a publisher. Nobody had a publisher back then, only Hemingway. He was attending University in Rapallo. He used to lunch with Pound and his wife at the Albergo Rapalis. Then swimming or tennis and reading Villain, Catullus. Pound was his mentor. He tells how Somoza once stole a mine from an uncle of his. James Laughlin is the grandson of Laughlin the Steel King. Of course he knew, says Laughlin, meaning Nixon. Nicanor's wine is gone, so we go to a French restaurant 3 blocks away. He liked solitude a lot and he liked people a lot. He loved silence and conversation, too. Merton was gregarious, you know, and a perfect monk. Midnight. Tomorrow's New York Times already at a tobacco stand. Nixon knew, says Dean, we buy it, in the subway an army poster, boys graduating. After graduation it's nice to join the army. And the dark subway cars now go by wildly painted on the outside, the names of boys and girls in many colors: Alice 95, Bob 106, Charles 195, and the express trains flash by American Samoa. If they were covered with flowers, their names and the streets where they live, they write them so someone will recognize them, so as to he real, says Napoleon, painted with every color spray paint, and there are names even a yard high: Manuel, Julia, Jose. Many Puerto Ricans. Slums without any beauty except for the clouds. 36 East 1 Street, the Bowery. I was moved as I saw the tiny sign out front, Catholic worker. A fat man lying on the sidewalk asks me softly for a cigarette. I was moved as I went into this holy place. She wasn't in, but she soon came along the sidewalk with a few other women, skinny, hunched, her hair white. She's still beautiful at 75. I kiss the saint's hand and she kisses my face. Like my grandmother Augustina in the 50s, when she could still read, and she was a reader of this woman. This is the famous House of Hospitality, founded by Peter Morin and Dorothy Day during the Great Depression, where food and shelter are free to all who come: drunks, weirdos, drug users, bums, and the dying. And it's also a pacifist and anarchist movement. Its goal, a society in which it will be easy to be good. Soon the poor would be coming in for their supper. I was studying at Columbia, and even there we heard that a saint had died in the beggars' neighborhood. Peter Morin, agitator and saint, used to preach in the parks. Fire your bosses. Or giving and not taking makes people human. In his one and only suit, rumpled and the wrong size. Without a bed of his own in this place that he founded, not even a corner for his books. He used to walk without watching the traffic lights. And she's been devoted since then to the works of mercy and rebellion. A life of daily communion and of taking part in every strike, demonstration, protest, march, or boycott. They come here to work without wages: students, seminarians, teachers, sailors, beggars too, and sometimes they stay all their lives. Many have been in jail or are still there. Hennessy used to fast in front of the government buildings with a placard, handing out flyers and selling the paper, and he didn't pay taxes because 85% is for the war. He worked as a farmhand to avoid paying taxes. Hugh was skinny, in short sandals and a poncho, and he also did penance in the streets. Jack English, a brilliant journalist from Cleveland, was the cook for the Catholic worker and later became a monk. Roger Laporte was a handsome blonde 22 years old. he killed himself by setting himself on fire with gasoline in front of the United Nations. And an old ex-Marine, Smokey Joe, who fought against Sandino in Nicaragua, died here, a convert to nonviolence. Merton worked here before he became a Trappist monk. The paper still sells for a cent as it did when Dorothy Day went out to sell it for the first time in Union Square one May day, 1933, it was the third year of the Depression, 12 million unemployed. And Peter wanted the tabloid to be, more than a publication of opinions, a revolution. The pot's now steaming, they're beginning to come, the poor, the homeless, the Bowery bums, to line up. The other United States, says Dorothy, men replaced by machines and abandoned by Holy Mother State. Shouts. Someone has bust in, kicking and reeling. 2 Catholic worker people gently take him out. We never call the police because we believe in nonviolence, and she also tells me, when I visited Cuba I saw that Sandino was one of their heroes and I was glad. Because as a young woman I collected money for him, when I was a communist, before my conversion to Catholicism. And I saw Sandino's top generals, not him, in Mexico, with their big sombreros, eating hot dogs. Why hot dogs I don't know. And Lively, raising her white head of hair, I know Castro's Cuba, as I told you in my letter. I liked it. Shouts. Now it's a dwarf. And someone gently carries her away, lifted in the air like a doll. She says that now they're helping Chavez's workers by boycotting the A&P chain. And she prays, she says, for the United States to have a purifying defeat. She talks about Joan Baez, who used to sing in Hanoi during the bombings. She says Hennessy used to say, contrary to what people think, it's not us anarchists that are bomb crazy, it's the government. And there isn't peace because the streets would be left with no traffic, the factories at a standstill, birds singing on top of the machines as she saw during the Great Depression. She talks about the horrors she has seen in the women's house of detention, the times that she's been in jail. And watching the poor come in, she repeats what Peter used to say, the future will be different if we make the present different. A reverent goodbye to this anarchist saint and to this holy place where everyone is welcome, everything free to each according to his needs, from each according to his abilities. Downtown. Uptown. Bang. Bang. Trains thundering along underground uptown and downtown with the names of poor children painted like flowers: Tom, Jim, John, Carolina, their names and the sad addresses where they live. They're real. So we'll know that they're real. Bang bang, the express trains on high-tension cables, they're shining ads for Calvert, Pall Mall, and the Army. It's nice to join the Army. At night, near Wall Street, in an apartment with no furniture, Marxist priests and laymen and Protestant ministers to change the system in which profit is the goal of mankind. There is no room for Christian ethics within the limits of private morality. The vision of the kingdom of God is subversive. One of them works with computers, another with the poor. Sunday night, and whole floors still lit up on Wall Street. They're screwing us. Hello Bogota. Hello ITT2 twin skyscrapers taller than the Empire State, the whole top half lit up, imperialism looming up in the sky behind the window panes. Hello, we wanted more drought. Who is that other monster rising up in the night? The Chase Manhattan Bank screwing half of humanity. Behind Wall Street, the Brooklyn Bridge, like a lyre of lights. In the dark, 2 kids look like they're stripping a car. Our pale satellite above the Brooklyn sky flattened like a football. Early the next day Tony took me back to Kennedy Airport in his Franciscan car. 6 days in New York. The benefit would be for conscientization. Not for any institution. Tony told me. Not for any institution. I didn't get a window seat. As we took off, out in the distance, just a glimpse, the silhouette of skyscrapers against a sky filled with automobile exhaust acids and carbon monoxide. 1973 J.C. Epistle to Monsignor Quesaldeliga. Monsignor. I read that in a sacking by the military police in the prelature of São Felix, they carried off, among other things, the Portuguese translation, I didn't know there was one, of Psalms by E Cardenal. And that all those arrested were given electric shocks for psalms that many had perhaps not read. I have suffered for them, and for so many others, in the nets of death. The snares of the abyss, my brothers and sisters, with the goad at your breasts, with the goad at your penis. I will tell you, those psalms have been banned here too, and Somoza said a short while ago in a speech that he would eradicate the obscurantism of Solentinaim. I saw your picture on the banks of the Araguaia the day of your consecration, with your mitre, which as we know is a palm leaf hat, and your crozier, an oar from the Amazonia. And I've learned that you're now waiting to be sentenced by the military court. I imagine you, while waiting, smiling as in the picture, smiling not at the camera but at all that was to come, at the hour when the woods turn greener or sadder, in the distance the lovely water of the Araguaia, the sun sinking behind distant estates. The forest begins there, its silence like a deafness. I spent a week on the Amazon, Letitia, and I remember the banks of trees hidden by tangles of parasites like finance companies. At night you've heard their strange noises, some are like moans and others like cackles. Jaguar after tapir, tapir frightening the monkeys scaring off macaws. It's on a page of Humboldt. Like a class society. An evening melancholy like that of the courtyards of penitentiary nuns. In the air there is dampness, and a kind of diop smell. Perhaps a sad wind blows from the northeast, from the sad northeast. There is a black frog in the black agarapes, I've read, a black frog that asks, what for? What for? Perhaps a flying fish leaps up. A heron takes flight, as graceful as Miss Brazil. In spite of the companies, the enterprises. The beauty of those shores, a prelude to the society that we shall have. That we shall have. They cannot, even though they try, take a planet away from the celestial system. Is Anaconda around there? Is Kennecott off there? Like here, the people are afraid. The layman, you've written, through the jungle like jaguars, like birds. I've learned the name of a boy, Chico, and the name of a girl, Rosa. The tribe is moving upstream. The companies come putting up fences. Across the Mato Grosso sky move the landowners in their private planes. And they don't invite you to the big barbecue with the Minister of the Interior. The companies sowing desolation. They bring in the telegraph to transmit false news. The transistor to the poor, for murmured lies. Truth is forbidden, for it makes you free. Desolation and division and barbed wire. You're a poet and you write metaphors. But you've also written. Slavery is not a metaphor. And they penetrate even into the upper Zangu, the hunters of usurious bank concessions. Weeping in those regions like the Amazonian rain. The military police have told you that all the church should worry about is souls. But what about children starved by corporations? Perhaps it's the middle of the night in the prelature of São Felix. You alone, in the mission house, surrounded by jungle, the jungle through which the corporations come advancing. It's the hour of the Diop spies and the gunmen of the companies. Is that a friend at the door, or is it the death squadron? I imagine, if there's a moon, a melancholy Amazonia moon, its light shines on private property. The great estate not for farming, let's get this straight, but so that the little farmer won't have his little farm. The middle of the night. Brother, how long will it take to reach Paranara? We don't know, brother. We don't know if we're near or far away, or if we've already passed it. But let's row, brother. The middle of the night. The little lights of the dispossessed shine on the shores. Their tearful reflections. Far, far away laugh the lights of Rio de Janeiro and the lights of Brasilia. How shall they possess the earth if the earth is owned by landowners? Unproductive, prized only for land speculation and fat loans from the Bank of Brazil. There he is always sold for $30 on the River of the Dead. The price of a peon. In spite of 2,000 years of inflation. The middle of the night. There is a humble little light, I don't know just where, a leper colony on the Amazon. The lepers are there on the dock waiting for Che's raft to come back. I've noticed that you quote my homage to the American Indians. I'm surprised that the book should travel as far as the upper Zing where you, Monsignor, defend these Indians. What greater homage? I think of the Pataxo Indians poisoned with smallpox, of 10,000 long ribbons, only 500 now. The Tapa-Iamas receiving gifts of sugar with arsenic. Another Mato Grosso tribe dynamited from a Cessna. The harsh Mangar drum does not sound calling to the moon dancers, the dancers disguised as butterflies, chewing the mystic coca leaf, the naked girls painted with the symbolic markings of the boa's skin, with gourd rattles on their ankles around the tree of life, the Pafeo palm. A chain of diamond shapes represents the serpent, and inside each diamond other frets, each fret another serpent. So that there are many serpents in the body of a single one, the communal organization of many individuals. Plurality within unity. At the beginning there was only water and sky. All was a void, all was great night. Afterward he made mountains, rivers. He said, now everything is there. The rivers called one another by their names. Men used to be howling monkeys. The earth has the shape of the breadfruit tree. All that time there was a ladder to climb up to the sky. Columbus found them in Cuba in a paradise where everything was held in common. The earth common like the sun and the water, without meum et tuum. They gave someone a length of cloth and cutting it into equal pieces he divided it among the whole tribe. No tribe in America with private property, that I know of. The whites brought money, the private monetary evaluation of things. Shouts the crackling of huts in flames, shots, of 9,000 mutacuras, 1,200. Of 4,000 Karajas, 400. The Topalumas, completely gone. The private appropriation of Eden or the green hell. As a Jesuit has written, the thirst for blood greater than the river. A new order. Or rather a new heaven and a new earth. New Jerusalem. Neither New York nor Brasilia. A passion for change, the nostalgia of that city. A beloved community. We are foreigners in Consumer City. The new man, and not the new Oldsmobile. Idols are idealism. While the prophets were professing dialectical materialism. Idealism, Miss Brazil on the screen blotting out 100,000 prostitutes on the streets of Sao Paulo. And in the futuristic Brasilia the decrepit marshals from their desks execute handsome young men by telephone, exterminate the happy tribe with a telegram, trembling, rheumatic and arthritic, cadaverous, backed up by fat gangsters with dark glasses. This morning the termite entered my cabin on the side where the books are, Fanon, Freire, also Plato, a perfect society but without one change, for millions of years without one change. Not long ago a reporter asked me why I write poetry, for the same reason as Amos, Nahum, Ageo, Jeremiah. You have written, cursed be private property. And Saint Basil, owners of the common goods, because they were the first to seize them. For communists there is no God, only justice. For Christians there is no God without justice. Monsignor, we are subversives, a secret code on a card in a file who knows where, followers of the ill-clad and visionary proletariat, a professional agitator, executed for conspiring against the system. It was, you know, a torture intended for subversives, the cross was for political criminals, not a cluster of rubies on a bishop's breast. Nothing is profane anymore. He is not beyond the atmospheric skies. What does it matter, Monsignor, if the military police or the CIA converts us into food for the bacteria in the soil and scatters us throughout the universe? Pilate stuck the sign up in 4 languages, subversive. One arrested in the bakery. Another one waiting for a bus to go to work. A long-haired hoy falls in a Sao Paulo street. There is resurrection of the flesh. If not, how can there be a permanent revolution? One day LT Tempo appeared jubilant on the streets of Bogota. It reached me even in Solentiname, Camilo Torres dead, enormous black letters, and he's more alive than ever, defying El Tiempo. And they say in Brasilia, do not picture for us true visions, speak to us of flattering things, contemplate illusions. The Brazilian miracle of a Hilton hotel surrounded by hovels. The price of things goes up and the price of people comes down. Manpower as cheap as is possible, cleanliness is not for them. The Beethoven Symphony. And in the Northeast then stomachs are devouring themselves. Yes, Giuliao, capital is multiplying like bacilli. Capitalism, the accumulation of sin, like the pollution of Sao Paulo, the whiskey-colored miasma over Sao Paulo. Its cornerstone is inequality. In the Amazon I met a famous Mike who exported piranhas to the USA, and he could send only 2 in each tank, so that one could always elude the other. If there are 3 or more they all destroy one another. That's like this Brazilian model of piranhas. Mass production of misery, crime in industrial quantities. Death on the production line. Mario Japa asked for water on the Pau de Arara and they made him swallow a pound of salt. With no news because of censorship, we know only, there where the helicopters gather is the body of Christ. About violence, I would say, there exists the violence of evolution and the violence that retards evolution. And a love stronger than the Diops and the Death Squadron. But sadism and masochism are class harmony, sadism and masochism of oppressor and oppressed. But love also is implacable, like the Diops. The yearning for union can carry one to the Pau de Arara, to the machine gun butt slams on the head, the punches in the face with bandaged fists, the electrodes. For that love many have been castrated. You feel the loneliness of being only individuals. Perhaps while I'm writing you've already been condemned. Perhaps later I'll be jailed. Prophet, there where the Araguaia and the Xingu come together, and also poet, you are the voice of people with adhesive tape across their mouths. This is no time for literary criticism. Nor for attacking the guerrillas with surrealistic poems. And what use are metaphors if slavery is not a metaphor, if death in the river of the dead is not a metaphor, if the squadron of death is not? Now the people weep on the Pau de Arara. But every rooster that crows in the Brazilian night is now subversive. It crows revolução and it's subversive, at the end of each night, like a girl handing out leaflets or posters about Che, each red dawn. Greetings to the farmers, the peons, the laymen in the jungle, to the Tapurapi chief, the little sisters of Foucault, Chico, and Rosa. With a hug from Eco Beto Cardenal. 1974 DDW. Epistle to José Coronel Urtco. Poet. I have enjoyed your lectures on private enterprise, homilies, I would say, which you wrote in Granada, in your little house on the lake, and you took so long to write them that you thought you told me there once that perhaps when you finished them there would be no private enterprise. There still is. But there won't be for very long. Yours was a heroic effort to be understood, in spite of the inflation and devaluation of language in the language of every day, which is also that of poetry, by the entrepreneurs. And it was, I suppose, a futile effort. They will not be saved, save the exceptions we know. Some will be saved individually. Engels was a millionaire. You know as well as I that they are lost cases. Save a few whom we know about. A revolutionary become entrepreneur to finance das Kapital. You, poet, who as you say possess no earthly goods, and often repeat to us that Las Brisas ranch is not yours but Maria's and your children's, and that you are staying there only as a guest, and never in your life have you sold anything, have now preached about private enterprise. And it was, it seems to me, only so that those who looked would not see, those who heard would not understand unless they are converted and saved, a Cadillac through the eye of a needle. They may be good people, according to Marx. Some capitalists have a good heart. So, it's not a question of changing the heart but the system. Private property, that euphemism. Thieves is not rhetoric. It's not a figure of speech. Charity in the Bible is tzedakah, justice. The correct terminology that Maestro Pound required, and alms, a giving back. This has much to do with inflation and devaluation, of language and of money. The solution is simple, to give to others in brotherhood. Capitalism impedes communion. Banks impede communion. And no one with more than he really needs. It's in the bank's interest that language be confused. Maestro Pound has taught us, therefore our task is to make language clear. To revalue words for the new nation while the FSLN advances in the north. Saint Ambrose thundered in his Milan cathedral, on the threshold of feudalism, the cathedral not yet Gothic or Romanesque but revolutionary. The earth belongs to everybody, not the rich. And St. John Chrysostom in Byzantium with his biblical Marxism, the community of goods is more faithful to nature. In the language of the New Testament, I was saying to you back there in Las Brisas, citing Father Segundo, the sin is conservatism. The world in St. John is the status quo. The world sin is the system. A change of attitude is one of structures. Acquire more earnings to accumulate more capital to acquire more earnings to, and so on to infinity. Others. The work of others according to Chrysostom. I enjoy my things. No, not yours but those of others. A kind of automatic fruition. So many times already we have commented on this, with the texts of Maestro Pound. The parthenogenesis of money. And the girls of Madagua are very beautiful, but they are being sterilized. There still is private property. But there won't be for very long. This prehistory is already passing from the surface of this planet in the hands of a few. We were reading the other afternoon here under the mango tree looking at the blue lake and across it the little island La Sigiana, what Fidel says, the earth will be like the air, and the young people of the youth club are already dreaming of that day when the island La Sigiana, La Venata, all the islands are theirs, and the whole country. Abroad one says my land, Laureano said, but it's a lie, it belongs to other sons of bitches. And we have learned that now in Portugal the bankers are in prison. Millionaires, and not shoeshine boys. The Bank of the Holy Spirit has been closed. A kind of automatic fruition, as if money labored. The holy banking business. Its function is to look for money that doesn't exist and lend it. There is no communion with God or with man if there are classes, if there is exploitation there is no communion. They've told me I talk only about politics now. It's not about politics but about revolution, which for me is the same thing as the kingdom of God. Building the earth. The transformation of the earth into a human earth, or the humanization of nature. Everything, even the heavens, a little man, as Vallejo said. Filling this blue planet with love. Or the revolution is bureaucratic. Like the step from Australopithecus to Pithecanthropus. The subject fully objective and the object fully subjective. Masters of nature and of themselves, free, without a state. Ursa Major then will have the form of a giraffe. The new man is not just one, you told me one day there on the river, he is many together. A change in man, they say, not in structures. But a change in structures is also one in man's subconscious. A new relationship among men and between man and the natural world and with the other, on which you also insist so much. Marx said he did not know what there would be after communism. As the tree opens toward the light, evolution opens toward love. The planet will not be dominated by insects, monkeys, or robots, or by Frankenstein's monster. A trillion and some since the first cell. He saw that matter was good, a materialistic God. And with creation began liberation. And sin is counter-evolutionary, the tendency toward the inorganic is anti-historical. How did our matter escape from antimatter? And what does Christ's giving the kingdom to the Father mean? Who was revealed in the bush as he who hears the masses, as the liberation from slave society? And we might also wonder, what relationship is there between resurrection and the means of production? All cells come from other cells. Life is produced by the participation of life. Reproduction is by communion. It would be unjust, the final injustice, if there were none. There is resurrection, if not, could those who died before the revolution not then be freed? The abolition of death. But first naturally that of money. You have returned to the river, to Las Brisas Ranch, which isn't yours, Hut Maria's and your children's, to your monastery in the Medio Queso plain surrounded by jungle which is always covered with water except in summer, where a short time back a president without a bodyguard visited you, not Nicaragua's of course, Costa Rica's. Your monastery where you now practice your painful penitence of writing prose. Your painful daily prose. But prophetic prose. I prefer verse, you know, because it's easier and briefer and the people understand it better, like posters. Without forgetting that revolutionary art without artistic value has no revolutionary value. Mao, you were a reactionary before and now you are uncomfortable in the left, but in the extreme left, without having changed anything inside you, the reality around you has changed. The prophet can make mistakes. Jeremiah, I have learned, was wrong in a prophecy on international politics. You, poet, have returned to your remote monastery, now threatened by an Onassis oil pipeline, like Solentinaim the chain of Howard Hughes casinos, and you hold forth there at all hours facing the plains for anyone willing to listen to you, prophesying at all hours, money as the end of life, work for the love of money and not for the love of work, facing the plains, always green even in summer, with palm trees, cubas rusanianas, and patacona doves and papone doves and squawking flocks of whistling ducks. The Jesuits' University, Inkai, the realists with no more reality than what produces earnings, and from time to time Martin Penis also fly by, and kingfishers with long beaks and tangled topknots, and veterinas with plucked necks also in flocks. The young executive with no time to have his wife, or the friends in Managua who never do anything because they are too busy, or they are Guayarns, or the plane from San Jose, Costa Rica, which is now coming down to land at Los Chiles. Or they are cormorants, the two kinds of people who run things in Nicaragua, the bloodsuckers / and the shit-eaters, and the coot the color of a waterflower runs along the ditch water, and the black sergeant who emerges from the Sorocantiles with his blood stain like a National Guard, the shitocracy, generals and businessmen, when they are not businessmen generals, in your rustic study built by Maria, open on the plain. Far off on the horizon the blue line of the river, nearly invisible and from time to time nearly inaudible, the murmur of a boat's motor. Nicaraguan history stopped in 1936, and if it is late the macaws pass by in pairs, a cuaco sings who knows where, the frog croaks you, calling the female you, and when the female comes to him he mounts her. He's crazy, but since they all obey him, he seems sane. The heron of foamy feathers and yellow beak takes flight and the moon comes out, the full moon on the Medio Queso plain, and Maria calls us for supper. Revolutionary art without artistic value. And artistic art without revolutionary value. It seems to me that great bards of the 20th century are in publicity, those Keatses and Shelleys singing the Colgate Smile, cosmic Coca-Cola, the pause that refreshes, the make of car that will take us to the land of happiness. The inflation and devaluation of language keeping pace with that of money and caused by the same people. They call plunder investments. And they're covering the earth with empty cans. Like a river in Cleveland which is now flammable language, also polluted. It appears that he, Johnson, never understood that words also have a real meaning besides serving for propaganda. Time said that he does understand it, and he lies just the same. And the defoliation of Vietnam is a resource control program. It's also a defoliation of language. And language avenges itself, refusing to communicate. Plunder, investments. There are also crimes of the CIA in the realm of semantics. Here in Nicaragua, as you have said, the language of the government and private enterprise against the language of the Nicaraguan people. I remember that time in the little port of San Carlos where one turns to go to the post office and telegraph station and one sees the great open sky-colored lake, and Solentinaim also sky-colored, and the volcanoes of Costa Rica, and the sunsets are comparable only to those of Naples. According to Squire, the National Guardsman drunk on the sidewalk with his garand pointing straight into his mouth, leaning on his garand so as not to fall, the worker drunk lying in the mud of the street covered with flies and with his fly open. And so you told me, this must be written in a poem so that they can know later what Somoza was. Poetry as a poster or a documentary film or a news item. You were with the reaction before. But your reaction was not so much the return to the Middle Ages as to the Stone Age, or perhaps even farther back. I have had a nostalgia for paradise all my life. I have looked for it like a Guarani, but now I know it's not in the past, a scientific error in the Bible which Christ has corrected, but in the future. You are an incorrigible optimist, like me, and at least for the short term you are more so than I am, and you turn on the radio each morning to hear the news that Somoza fell. Now you are going to be 70 and I hope you won't fall into the temptation of pessimism. Revolution doesn't end in this world, you told me once, on this island, facing the lake, and communism will continue in heaven. The FSLN is advancing in the north. Even in the Jesuits' university there are signs of life. The tenacious grass again shows itself among the concrete, the tender grass cracks through the concrete. Your lectures will be more appreciated without private enterprise. Right here I am looking through the fishnet at the calm lake, and I think, as the blue lake reflects the celestial atmosphere, so will be the kingdom of heaven on this planet. A heron by the water takes communion with a sardine. Regards to Maria and to the river. A hug from E Cardenal. PWB. 1975. Lights. That top secret flight at night. We might have been shot down. The night calm and clear. The sky teeming, swarming with stars. The Milky Way so bright behind the thick pane of the window, a sparkling white mass in the black night with its millions of evolutionary and revolutionary changes. We were going over the water to avoid Somoza's Air Force, but close to the coast. The small plane flying low, and flying slowly. First the lights of Rivas, taken and retaken by Sandinists, now almost in Sandinist hands. Then other lights, Granada, in the hands of the Guard. It would be attacked that night. Masaya, completely liberated. So many fell there. Farther out a bright glow, Managua. Site of so many battles. The bunker. Still the stronghold of the Guard. Diriamba, liberated. Genotep, fighting it out. So much heroism glitters in those lights. Montelimar the pilot shows us, the tyrant's estate near the sea. Puerto Somoza, next to it. The Milky Way above, and the lights of Nicaragua's revolution. Out there, in the north, I think I see Sandino's campfire. That light is Sandino. The stars above us, and the smallness of this land, but also its importance, these tiny lights of men. I think, everything is light. The planet comes from the sun. It is light turned solid. This plane's electricity is light. Its metal is light. The warmth of life comes from the sun. Let there be light. There is also darkness. There are strange reflections, I don't know where they come from, on the clear surface of the windows. A red glow, the tail lights of the plane. And reflections on the calm sea, they must be stars. I look at the light from my cigarette, it also comes from the sun, from a star. 98. And the outline of a great ship. The U.S. aircraft carrier sent to patrol the Pacific coast. A big light on our right startles us. A jet attacking? No. The moon coming out, a half moon, so peaceful, lit by the sun. The danger of flying on such a clear night. And suddenly the radio. Jumbled words filling the small plane. The Guard? The pilot says, it's our side. They're on our wavelengths. Now we're close to Leon, the territory liberated. A burning reddish-orange light, like the red-hot tip of a cigar, Corinto, the powerful lights of the docks flickering on the sea. And now at last the beach at Polnoya, and the plane coming into land, the string of foam along the coast gleaming in the moonlight. The plane coming down. A smell of insecticide. And Sergio tells me, the smell of Nicaragua. It's the most dangerous moment, enemy aircraft may be waiting for us over this airport. And the airport lights at last. We've landed. From out of the dark come olive green-clad comrades to greet us with hugs. We feel their warm bodies, that also come from the sun, that also are light. This revolution is fighting the darkness. It was daybreak on July 18th. And the beginning of all that was about to come.